Chapter 1425. Save us. Terror invaded his mind. The smell of death was close at hand. Lin Xing could no longer suppress his surging emotions. He opened his mouth and screamed. But this sentence inadvertently exposed a certain fact, that he and Zhou Sheng were originally in cahoots, and they had agreed to attack the peach garden together. Outside the peach garden, Zhou Sheng's action of forcing Lin Sheng to retreat was just a prearranged plot. Qin Yu frowned, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. In addition, he discovered another important piece of information. That was, Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng had a mastermind behind them, to be able to drive two true saints to attack. One could imagine the power of this mastermind. At this moment, a name appeared in Qin Yu's mind. It was a name that made one's mind tremble. Ruler. Only the highest level in this world had the qualifications to do such a thing. He took a deep breath and suppressed the shaking emotions in his heart. Now the arrow was knocked on the bowstring and had to be released. Even if he knew that the shadow of a ruler was behind them, Qin Yu could no longer stop. First, killing Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng was to intimidate all sides and create a safe environment for the peach garden. Second, the ruler of the vast Yang world had hidden away from the world, and this might have involved a higher level of influence. The yard master had occasionally mentioned this, and although she had not mentioned it in detail, it was certain that the ruler would not easily act unless it was absolutely necessary. And the most important point was the third. After the World Zeroth incident, Qin Yu was sure that he had a background. In terms of background, there was a true ruler behind him, even more mysterious, ancient, and powerful than the ruler of the vast Yang world. Well, of course, calling a beautiful woman Gu was a very rude thing to do. Thus, he had to quickly stop his thoughts. He didn't know whether or not that person had left some sort of mark on his body. Perhaps they really could monitor him to a certain degree. After all, as she said, she had invested a great deal in him, and was even prepared to entrust him with some matters. She would not ignore his existence. In short, Qin Yu was a little afraid of attacking Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng, but not too much. At most, it would be a contest of legs. Thinking of this, the chill in Qin Yu's eyes deepened, and the killing intent in his heart soared. Since he could sense that Zhou and Lin probably had a sovereign backing them, he needed to be quick and decisive in killing them. He didn't want to give them any chance to struggle or survive. With a thought, the rumbling between heaven and earth became even more intense. The flames burned fiercely, and after the meteors tore through the air, they emitted even more ear-piercing sounds. The giant skeleton roared and brazenly collided with the falling meteorite. Violent energy immediately erupted, wantonly striking out in a ring shape. In an instant, it was as if purgatory had descended, enveloping Saint Zhou and Saint Lin. If there were only 3, 5, or even 8 or 10 meteors, the combined power of the two saints would naturally be able to withstand it. But now, there seemed to be a huge hole in the burning sky. Countless meteors pierced through it, dragging long tails behind them as they came crashing down. The distorted rules of heaven and earth still existed. They used Lin Sheng's great Tao as a foundation. Even though they were pierced through by the meteorites, as long as Lin Sheng's great Tao did not collapse, they could continue to function. On the other hand, every time a meteorite pierced through the distorted rules, it would cause a certain degree of damage to Lin Sheng. As the saying went, sand piled up into a mountain. No matter what it was, as long as it accumulated to a certain amount, it would become extremely terrifying. The great Tao of a true saint was tyrannical, but even it could not withstand the repeated damage. Lin Sheng's face grew increasingly pale, and there was an ominous blue hue to it. His body trembled and twitched as the meteors fell. But in the current situation, all he could do was grit his teeth and endure. If he collapsed and only Zhou Sheng was left, he would not be able to withstand it. The giant skeleton's massive body was smashed into the ground. Countless hideous cracks appeared, spreading out in all directions, and at the same time, cracks appeared not only on the ground, but also on the giant skeleton's massive body. From these cracks, crimson blood flowed out, like small rivulets gathering on the ground, forming a small blood lake. At this time, the surface of the blood lake rippled. Twisted and pained faces appeared before shattering and vanishing. The giant skeleton's massive body began to bend under the pressure. Its thick bone legs could not withstand the continuous bombardment. They swayed and half knelt on the ground. Kacha! Kacha! More and more cracks appeared on its bones. It had nearly reached the limit of what it could withstand. But before help arrived, it was as if the two of them had been mercilessly abandoned. Lin Sheng raised his hands. His lips trembled as he roared out, "Stars!" Stars appeared one after another in the sky, where the destroyed country was burned red by the flames, sprinkling down endless starlight. As if they were attracted by something, they gathered and covered the body of the bone giant, as if it was wearing a layer of starlight armor. In the end, a true saint was still a true saint. Unless one became a ruler and there was an insurmountable gap between them, it was nearly impossible to quickly kill it, even if one held the absolute advantage. Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng could not escape, nor could they resist the endless bombardment of meteors. The only thing they could do now was to buy as much time as possible. It was impossible for such a terrifying supernatural ability to not have a limit. Perhaps in the next second, the terrifying meteor rain from the burning heavens would stop. Or perhaps they would see an opportunity and choose to rescue them. Or perhaps help was already on the way. Although all of this was unpredictable, there was still a chance to resist. If they gave up, then the only fate awaiting them was death. Qin Yu sensed Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng's thoughts. His lips curved up in a cruel smile. Defensive strike could control the stars in the skies. This meteor rain was clear proof of this. Lin Sheng clearly knew all of this, and yet he still dared to summon stars in front of him and condense starlight into armor. In Qin Yu's eyes, this sort of behavior was no different from seeking death. Lin Sheng feared that he had been scared senseless, or that this meteor rain was the limit of his control. Taking a step forwards, Qin Yu lifted his hand. His 5 fingers curled into a fist, and he grasped at the starry skies above. Defensive strike! With a loud shout, the stars in the skies shook. Lin Sheng's eyes widened, and he spat out a mouthful of blood, horror filling his eyes. He never imagined that the supernatural ability he had used on his own initiative would be forcefully interrupted. No, interrupted wasn't the right word to describe it. To be more accurate, Qin Yu had directly deprived him of the right to control his supernatural ability. Countless starlight separated from the shaking stars, gathering towards a point where it soon formed an incomparably massive spear of starlight. Whoosh! Without pause, the starlight spear howled out, crossing endless space in the blink of an eye and smashing into the bone giant's body. With the starlight spear resisting the starlight armor, this stalemate only lasted for a moment. The bone giant emitted a pained roar. With a loud shattering sound, the starlight spear pierced through its body and nailed it to the ground. Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng had opened the gate of Perished Nation and fled into the Perished Nation's territory. This exposed their vision, and they were watched by countless eyes. And the masters of these eyes were, without exception, the peak Permitha true saints of the vast Yang world. They wanted to use the result of this battle to determine just what sort of attitude they should have towards the Peach Garden. Seeing how Qin Yu had suppressed Saint Zhou and Saint Lin with such an unstoppable force that it was impossible for them to resist, the saints were all shocked. The strength that Qin Yu possessed in the journey of the Peach Garden was far beyond everyone's imagination. With his performance today, it was enough to protect the Peach Garden in the great changes of the world. Even if the Peach Garden Master had perished, she wouldn't be harmed in the least. If this was only to determine Qin Yu's strength, then the saints had already obtained their answer. But the gazes that gathered didn't lessen. They continued to watch the perished nation, waiting for new changes to occur. This was because they had already guessed that there was someone hidden behind Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng, and someone that could drive a true saint to attack. Hiss! Just thinking about this caused their hearts to chill. The world was in turmoil. As Permy thought true saints, they all had keen antennae. They had more or less sensed something strange and subtle. Could it be that they were behind Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng? If this were true, then they likely wouldn't allow these two true saints to perish like this. Thus, there was a high chance that Qin Yu would pass through this hurdle before things would truly come to an end. This hurdle wouldn't be easy. If he wasn't careful, then the seemingly incomparably powerful Qin Yu might die on the spot. After all, there was a high chance that there was a ruler standing guard behind them. And this was also what the saints were waiting for. At this time, the gathered eyes of the saints began to fluctuate. Their distant eyes revealed a dignified look. It's here. Qin Yu also sensed the powerful aura that suddenly appeared. It was like a towering mountain that pressed down on his head. It blotted out the skies, giving off a dark and oppressive feeling. Within the giant bone that was covered in cracks, Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng's eyes popped open, wild joy in their eyes. Save us! Save us! A true saint covered his entire body in black robes, stepped forwards. A terrifying suppressive aura instantly rose. The great calamity of Vastyong has arrived. No true saint can be lost. Before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted. Qin Yu's eyes were icy cold, like arrows that wanted to tear apart this person. You are the person they are waiting for? Very good. Without giving the other party a chance to speak, Qin Yu turned his hand behind him. The gate of perishing was still open, as if he had grasped onto something. Bang! An unimaginably terrifying aura erupted like a volcano. It swept out in all directions, covering everyone within. Beneath the black robes, the cold and gloomy face froze. His eyes, filled with killing intent, couldn't help but fill with fear. His first thought was that he couldn't block it, and then he would die. That's right, at this moment, the murderous black-robed true saint suddenly felt an intense threat of death. He even suspected that Qin Yu wouldn't give him a chance to say even half a word. In the next moment, Qin Yu would attack. Shua, the black-robed figure, instantly retreated. He tore through the space of the perishing kingdom and vanished beneath the eyes of the many people. At this moment, the world fell deathly silent. After a brief moment of silence, disbelief and horror appeared in everyone's eyes. Chapter 14:26. The ninth Qin Yu. This was the ninth Qin Yu of the Peach Garden. No, from today onwards, he would undoubtedly become the new guardian of the Peach Garden. And Qin Yu had used his actions to prove that he indeed had the qualifications to replace the Garden Master. He had truly risen up and shaken Vastyong. Perished. The starlight spear pierced through the bone giant's body and nailed it to the ground. Zhou Sheng and Lin Sheng revealed looks of despair. They knew that with the retreat of the black-robed true saint, their lives had come to an end. But at this moment, Qin Yu didn't relax at all. He kept his hand moving backwards, his fingers tightly clenched. His knuckles turned white and tiny blood vessels bulged out. It was like he was really holding onto something intangible. Kacha! Kacha! The open gate of perish trembled. Cracks began to appear, weaving together. Qin Yu looked up. His pupils shrank as he stared at the nothingness somewhere. The black-robed, true saint had already retreated. But he felt an even more intense restlessness in his heart. It was like some terrifying existence had followed the black-robed true saint and arrived in a perished world. It was here, but it couldn't be locked onto by sight or divine sense. It was like a shadow, but it could send a person to hell at any moment. With Qin Yu's current cultivation, the only one that could give him such a terrifying feeling, as if he could be killed at any moment, was the ruler. The shocked gazes of the perished world met. They clearly sensed something from Qin Yu's expression, and their bodies began to shiver. Would the ruler's situation of seclusion change because of the arrival of the great calamity? If so, then the heavens would truly change. The true saint would still be at the peak of the world, but he would no longer have the qualifications to lead or control vast Yang. The ruler would personally enter the battlefield. They would all be reduced to chess pieces at most. They would be relatively powerful chess pieces. In the deathly silence, Qin Yu let out a long breath. The terrifying feeling of impending destruction finally faded from sight. This meant that the sovereign who had descended here had chosen to retreat in the end. Perhaps it was because the restriction of the ruler's seclusion still existed, or perhaps he had sensed the aura of that woman on Qin Yu's body. But in any case, it definitely wasn't because he feared Qin Yu's strength. This was truly an embarrassing matter. But after experiencing the ruler's malicious gaze, Qin Yu's heart tightened once more. He didn't have the heart to care about how awkward it was. Originally, he thought that with his current cultivation and strength, he would be able to look down on everyone. However, who knew that in the era of the true divine dominating Haoyang, there would suddenly be a change. Even though the sovereigns hadn't personally appeared in this world, yet there was no doubt that they had already quietly made their move. They had already begun to make arrangements in this world. If they wanted to escape the fate of becoming chess pieces, they had to become even more powerful. Bang, bang, bang. Amidst the heaven-shaking explosions, the flaming meteors continued to crash down. The giant bone monster had completely collapsed, and the auras of Zhou and Lin had vanished. Two powerful true sages had fallen just like that. Although he was a murderer, at this moment Qin Yu could still feel the cruelty and tyranny of heavenly tribulation. If he couldn't become stronger, then the one who killed him today would be Qin Yu. But perhaps one day in the future, the one who would be killed would be him. He suppressed these thoughts and steadied his mind. With a flick of his sleeves, the firmament-burning dome was quickly extinguished, and the blood-jade coffin held out, rushing into the place where the bone giant had fallen. Woo! Woo! A strange and sharp sound echoed out from the blood-jade coffin. Two incomparably solid phantoms condensed in the void. These were the two sages Zhou and Lin who had just been brutally killed. Their eyes were blank and filled with a bit of resentment and resistance. But they couldn't resist the strength of the blood-jade coffin. With a deep roar, they turned into two masses of light that submerged into the coffin. Pa! The blood-jade coffin closed and flew back to Qin Yu's side. He grabbed it and put it away. After finishing this, he swept his eyes around. After determining that he hadn't left anything behind, he turned and stepped into the gate of perished nation. The moment Qin Yu vanished, the world around the gate of perished nation began to shake. A powerful, repulsive strength erupted. With a loud bang, the gate of perished nation closed, as if it were sending away a god of plague. Peach Garden. Because the gate of perished nation was still open, no one could hear anything, but they could clearly see everything that happened. They saw Qin Yu scare away the ruler of the perished nation and the black-robed true sage. Then he used his starlight spear to pierce through the giant bone monster and then borrowed a meteor from the heavens to forcefully kill him. All of these scenes left everyone overwhelmed with emotion. Seeing Qin Yu step through the gate of perished nation and return to Peach Garden once more, Lei Xiaoyu was incomparably excited. She stepped forwards and cried out, "Big brother Qin!" Just now she really thought she would die. Qin Yu nodded to her. Then he frowned and turned to look at the elder senior apprentice brother in the thousand-faced assassin's arms. Facing Qin Yu's gaze, the elder senior apprentice brother forced a smile. "I'm fine." Shua! Qin Yu stepped forwards and appeared at the thousand-faced assassin's side. Elder senior apprentice brother, don't resist. His eyebrows furrowed together, his complexion solemn. Everyone who had just been overjoyed suddenly paled. The thousand-faced assassin stared at Qin Yu, revealing a pained expression. Then, in front of everyone's eyes, she changed her face. The thousand-faced assassin was still beautiful and charming, but the indifference in the depths of her eyes was much deeper. Qin Yu glanced at her, his eyebrows furrowed even tighter, but he didn't say anything. Seeing the elder senior apprentice brother nod, Qin Yu reached out a hand and pressed it against his body. Great furnace! He could clearly see that the elder senior apprentice brother's condition was extremely poor. He had just condensed his great Tao and was already suffering heavy losses. Or, to be more precise, he had already begun to collapse. Once he couldn't stop it, all that awaited him was death. The elder senior apprentice brother hesitated, as if he already knew his own situation. But he looked at the thousand-faced assassin and then at the nervous crowd that surrounded him. He forced a smile and didn't say anything. In this world, everyone would die. No one knew what they would encounter in the future. Even someone as powerful as his honorable master would inevitably perish, so it was normal for him to welcome the arrival of death. Qin Yu didn't obtain a response. The furnace's aura was normal, but it was in an extremely dispirited and listless state, as if it were a corpse. It was clear that the matter of the furnace giving birth to the great Tao had caused far too much damage to it. Even now, it still hadn't calmed down. Qin Yu could understand that it would be difficult for a self-aware male to recover from the wounds caused by being forced to give birth. But the elder senior apprentice brother could die at any moment. He didn't have time to wait for the furnace to slowly heal him. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu roared out inwardly, "Furnace! This is the second time I'm calling you, and it will also be the last time. Otherwise, believe me, when it comes to giving birth, if you can do it once, then you can do it a second time." As if his butt had been set on fire, or as if someone had mercilessly ripped open his wound, the silent strength of the furnace instantly began to seethe and boil. The image of him trembling in anger and gnashing his teeth appeared in Qin Yu's mind. Without giving the furnace a chance to rage, Qin Yu coldly said, "Since you've come back to life, then go and save him. If you can do it, I guarantee that I will never let you experience something like that again." This was probably what it meant to be beaten down with a stick and then given a carrot. This was probably the situation. Qin Yu had reached the point of perfection in this. The furnace was stunned for a moment before falling silent. Qin Yu actually relaxed inwardly. "Remember what you said." Vague thoughts fluctuated in his mind. It was clear that after swallowing the everlasting flame, the furnace had undergone another transformation and was now able to communicate on its own initiative. The furnace phantom appeared, absorbing strength. Seeing the thousand-faced assassin frown, Qin Yu said, "Seventh senior apprentice sister, don't worry. Elder senior apprentice brother will be fine." She stared into Qin Yu's eyes for several breaths of time. Then, she let go of elder senior apprentice brother and allowed him to fly into the furnace phantom. Although she didn't say anything, Qin Yu felt a bit of dread as she stared at him. He couldn't help but frown. The indifference in the thousand-faced assassin's eyes didn't seem normal. Thinking for a moment, Qin Yu asked, "Are you confident?" The furnace's thoughts fluctuated. "I won't die." It was clear that this fellow's anger hadn't yet dissipated. However, it didn't matter whether it was angry or not as long as elder senior apprentice brother was fine. He would worry about the furnace's mentality later. Right now, the most important thing was Peach Girl. Just now, elder senior apprentice brother's condition was too dangerous and Qin Yu had no choice but to immediately deal with him. But this didn't mean that Peach Girl wouldn't have any problems. Facing Qin Yu's eyes, Peach Girl's lips moved. "Where did my father perish?" Qin Yu grabbed her hand. "I can answer all your questions, but not now." He swept his eyes over everyone. "Senior apprentice brothers and sisters, I will stabilize Peach Girl's situation first. I will leave everything else to you." After speaking, he stepped forwards and left with Peach Girl. Schwa. Space twisted and a pale white phoenix appeared. She glanced at the place where Qin Yu and Peach Girl had left and smiled. "He's fine now." Everyone instantly understood what he meant. Although they had already expected this, they still couldn't help but feel happy. Their little junior apprentice brother had returned. He had killed 2 true saints with thunderous methods and revealed an incomparably powerful strength. Naturally, no one dared to have any ideas about the peach garden anymore. This calamity had passed. Since my peach garden has passed today's trial, we must clearly remember everything that happened today. Second senior apprentice brother sneered. The peach garden had never been hypocritical and righteous. They never paid attention to repaying evil with good. On the contrary, starting from the peach garden master, they had always held grudges. Second senior apprentice brother is right, but we can't rush this. We need time to restore order to the peach garden, and we also need to become stronger. Speaking to here, White Phoenix paused for a moment. She looked at everyone with a heavy expression. In the past, when Honorable Master was here, we were able to enjoy the noble status of disciples of the peach garden with a clear conscience and a peaceful life where no one dared to provoke us. But now that Honorable Master has passed away, and although we still have our little junior apprentice brother and sister, we don't have the face to accept our little junior apprentice brother's protection. So it is time for us to work even harder and break through our current boundaries as soon as possible. We must strive to step into the saint realm. Second senior apprentice brother turned and left. I will immediately go into seclusion in the wine cellar. Unless absolutely necessary, don't let anyone disturb me. Schwa! His figure flickered, and he vanished from sight. Within the furnace phantom, the eldest senior apprentice brother opened his eyes. He looked in the direction that 100 Battles ye had left in, and slowly said, "If 100 Battles doesn't come out in 3 days, go and ask our little junior apprentice brother to come out." "Yes, eldest senior apprentice brother." Everyone nodded, their eyes complex and firm. After experiencing today's calamity, the mentality of the peach garden disciples had changed. Without accident, as long as they were given enough time to settle, their strength would rise at an astonishing rate. Chapter 14:27. Peach Girl's situation was very tricky. What was worse was that Qin Yu discovered that she no longer wanted to live. He opened his eyes and looked at Peach Girl in front of him. He frowned and said in a low voice, "Senior sister, don't worry. I'm back. I can protect you." Peach Girl shook her head. "Junior brother, you don't have to sacrifice yourself to save me." Deep in her indifferent eyes, a trace of pain and gloominess flashed. "I am an unlucky person. I was born to be a burden to my parents. I don't want to be a burden to anyone else in this world." Qin Yu's heart tightened. He was sure that Peach Girl already knew the truth that led to the fall of the yard master. This was indeed a cruel reality. He could understand and feel the pain in Peach Girl's heart. But no matter what, he couldn't watch her abandon herself to despair. His thoughts raced. Qin Yu took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Senior sister, since you know how you survived until now, can you bear to see the yard master's sacrifice be in vain?" He stared at Peach Girl and said in a heavy tone, "Saints are nearly immortal. If it weren't for saving senior sister, the yard master wouldn't have injured her foundation and weakened herself. She is doomed to die soon." Peach Girl trembled. Pain appeared in the depths of her cold and calm eyes. Qin Yu wanted to save her. He didn't want to kill her with words. So, when he saw Peach Girl's emotions fluctuate violently, he immediately softened his tone. "The yard master loves senior sister to the extreme. That's why she was willing to sacrifice herself to save your life. Just because of this, your life no longer belongs to you. It is also the continuation of the yard master's life. How can you give up like this? If the yard master knew this, she would be very sad." Peach Girl lowered her head. "If I want to live, I can only use the great Tao to prolong my life. No matter who helps me, they will only follow in my father's footsteps." Qin Yu immediately said, "Me." Meeting Peach Girl's eyes, He smiled and tried to make his voice gentle and sincere. I'm not sure if senior sister knows, but I can tell you clearly that I cultivate the true divinity path. I don't need to explain the specifics of this cultivation system. I shouldn't have the great Tao, but under a lucky coincidence, I condensed it. I know this is very hard to believe, but I promise that everything I said is true, and there is absolutely no falsehood in it. I have to admit that condensing the great Tao will indeed increase my strength to a certain extent. However, this was just an additional gain. In other words, even if the great Tao was damaged, it would not endanger my foundation. Also, as a cultivator of the true God path, since I have the great Tao, I can repair and refine it. So even if it is damaged, it is not something that cannot be recovered. Eldest senior brother's injuries are related to the destruction of the great Tao. The furnace I summoned can save him, but it can't possibly be ineffective on me. Of course, you should be familiar with this furnace, senior sister. You met it in the endless sea. I survived because of senior sister's help, and also because of the yard master's help. Finally, I was able to use this cauldron to condense the great path. One peck and one drink are almost destined, so it's only natural for me to save senior sister. This is what I owe the yard master and the peach garden. After saying so much in a single breath, Qin Yu's mouth felt dry. It wasn't that he was thirsty, but that he was incomparably nervous. If Peach Girl was determined to die and refused to cooperate with the treatment, she would really die very soon. If she died, that would mean that all of Qin Yu's efforts would be meaningless. Ning Ling and Yu Qi would vanish without a trace, never to return. Peach Girl maintained her previous bowed posture, as if she weren't moved by his words. As Qin Yu was racking his brains, he didn't know what to say. She suddenly said, "Answer a question of mine." Qin Yu reached out a hand. "Senior apprentice sister, please speak. I can sense that you saved me for another reason. What is that reason?" Peach Girl looked up into Qin Yu's eyes. Her heart skipped a beat. Her first thought was to hide the truth, but this thought only appeared for a moment before she suppressed it. After a brief silence, Qin Yu said, "I saved senior apprentice sister because I wanted to save someone." He looked up, a bitter smile on his face. "This is a relatively long story. Today, I will briefly explain it. If senior apprentice sister is interested, once your condition stabilizes, I can tell you the details." Since he had already spoken, there was no need to hide anything. Qin Yu told her about the discovery of the myriad soul Tao in the past, as well as the relationship between Peach Girl, Ningling, and Yu Qi. That's how things are. So, the reason I saved senior apprentice sister is because I promised the garden master that I would do everything possible to protect your life, and also because I had a reason that I had no choice but to do so. The reason I didn't tell you the truth before was to avoid unnecessary trouble. I asked senior apprentice, sister, to understand. Across from him, Peach Girl had a calm and indifferent expression, not revealing the least bit of emotion. After several breaths of time, she slowly said, "I'll have to trouble little junior apprentice brother." Qin Yu's face lit up with joy. He hurriedly said, "Of course, there is no need for senior apprentice sister to do this." After finally convincing Peach Girl that she didn't want to die, he didn't dare to delay any longer. He reached out a hand and placed it between Peach Girl's eyebrows. The process might be a bit painful. I asked senior apprentice, sister, to bear with it. 2 hours later, Qin Yu withdrew his hand, his complexion pale. This was the first time he had mobilized the great Tao to save someone. He had no experience at all, and several accidents had almost occurred. Luckily, he had smoothly completed it. Across from him, Peach Girl's eyes were closed. Her clothes were soaked with sweat and clung tightly to her body, revealing her domineering curves. Qin Yu couldn't help but glance at her. He coughed and stood up. "Senior apprentice sister, your situation has stabilized. I will bid my farewells first." Peach Girl imperceptibly nodded. Qin Yu turned and left. The moment the door closed, Peach Girl opened her eyes. They were incomparably dark, and there was even a bit of bitterness in them. So it was like this. Since it was like this, then she had to give up those thoughts that she shouldn't have. Whether it was out of gratitude towards her father for risking his life to save her, or because she wanted to thank Chinyu for saving Peach Garden today, she could no longer refuse treatment. If so, what would she live for in the future? A vacant look appeared in Peach Girl's eyes. She slowly lowered her head and fell silent. Who? Chinyu let out a long breath. He turned to look at Peach Girl's residence, a bit of unwillingness on his face. The reason he had hurriedly left just now wasn't because Peach Girl's clothes were soaked in sweat, but because he didn't know how to face her again. He didn't conceal anything and told her the truth. Although Peach Girl no longer resisted treatment, it also gave the fragile Peach Girl another heavy blow. What Chinyu truly cared about wasn't whether she lived or died. Rather, he just happened to want to save the Tao companion of her divided soul. The garden master had perished, and Peach Girl no longer had anyone to rely on. Chinyu had noticed the faint changes in her emotions. He naturally understood that his current stance was a great provocation to Peach Girl. But there was no way Chinyu could explain this, because this was the truth. He stood where he was, silently sensing his surroundings. If anything went wrong, Chinyu would immediately move to stop her. He had to admit that when facing Peach Girl, he was indeed cruel. That was, no matter what Peach Girl thought, he would never allow her to die. And when a person couldn't even control their own life or death, that was undoubtedly a pitiful matter. Luckily, Peach Girl didn't give Chinyu another chance to be cruel. Her aura was extremely stable. After waiting for a moment to determine that she wouldn't take things too hard anytime soon, Chinyu looked away and quickly walked away. Although he had the Great Furnace's guarantee, Chinyu still couldn't relax. Luckily, his eldest senior apprentice brother's condition had stabilized. According to what the Great Furnace said, a newly formed and fragile Great Tao was now like a hammer that had smashed through it from top to bottom. There wasn't a single place that wasn't damaged at all. Wanting to restore, it wouldn't be simple at all. Chinyu thought it was strange. From one void and two white, to half completion of the Great Tao, and then to the condensation of the Great Tao. Well, if he said this, others would surely gnash their teeth in anger. But this was the truth. The process had been easy and quick, and Chinyu hadn't even had time to react before he was finished. Although rebuilding after a disaster was much more difficult, it shouldn't be to such a degree. Chinyu suspected that the Great Furnace was taking revenge on him and was deliberately slacking off. The Great Furnace clearly sensed Chinyu's thoughts and nearly exploded with rage. I say, can you at least have a bit of common sense? Tempering the Great Tao is an action that defies the heavens and changes one's fate to begin with, something that goes against the will of the world. If it weren't for this, the one who created me wouldn't have perished on the spot and would have given a top treasure like me to you for such a cheap price. You are the one I recognized as my master, and our auras are related, so I can help you quickly temper your Great Tao. But if it were anyone else and they were to use this speed, that would be the same as pointing a middle finger at the heavens and provoking you. Just turn around and hundreds of bolts of thunder will come crashing down. Do you believe me when I say they won't turn to ashes? Chinyu lightly coughed and rubbed his nose. Although the Great Furnace's attitude was extremely nasty, his intuition told him that this fellow wasn't lying. He looked at the thousand-faced cultivator and said, "Seventh senior apprentice sister, don't worry. Elder senior apprentice brother's condition is stable and there isn't any danger to his life. He will wake up soon." For a cultivator, sleeping was also an effective form of self-protection. It could restore one's injuries at the fastest speed possible. For elder senior apprentice brother to last until he fainted was already a true man. The thousand-faced cultivator relaxed. "Thank you, junior apprentice brother." He turned to look at the unconscious elder senior apprentice brother on the bed. At this time, he shouldn't disturb him any further. Quietly leaving was the best choice. But Qin Yu hesitated for a moment. He said, "Seventh senior apprentice sister, your condition." After a brief silence, the thousand-faced cultivator's voice sounded out. "Thank you for your concern, junior apprentice brother. I am fine." Qin Yu frowned, but as if thinking of something, he didn't continue speaking. He cupped his hands together and left. He met with the other disciples of Peach Garden outside elder senior apprentice brother's courtyard. After a brief exchange, Qin Yu asked Lei Xiaoyu to find some reliable maids to take care of Peach Girl. Although her condition had stabilized, she was still weak. "Senior apprentice brothers, I will go back and rest first. If there is anything you need me to do, feel free to send someone to find me." "All right, junior apprentice brother, go and rest." He turned and left. After returning to his dwelling, Qin Yu's thoughts stirred. He blocked off his senses and frowned. "Why did you stop me just now?" The stone pagoda's voice sounded out. "The thousand-faced cultivator's condition is very strange. If Master stimulates her now, there might be an accident." Qin Yu asked, "Then what should I do?" "The stone pagoda said she isn't in a rush right now. Master might as well observe her. As long as she is still in Peach Garden, you can help her at any time." Qin Yu thought for a moment and nodded. "That's fine." He turned and sat down. After thinking for a moment, he walked towards the training room. The courtyards of Peach Garden disciples seemed simple, but the truth was that they weren't. For instance, even if a saint were to clash with him, it wouldn't be easy to damage them. That's right. Qin Yu was preparing to go into seclusion to cultivate. This wasn't because he was trying to make a last-minute effort, but because the might of the inherited supernatural powers was far greater than he had imagined. As he realized that the ruler had gone into seclusion and was on the verge of collapse, Qin Yu's desire to increase his strength became increasingly urgent. Comprehending and cultivating the 5 great inherited divine abilities was undoubtedly the most effective and the most convenient method at the moment. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. There was a knock on the courtyard doors. Shwa! Qin Yu opened his eyes, a sharp light flashing within them. He stood up and opened the courtyard doors with a flick of his sleeves. It was Lei Xiaoyu. There was a hint of worry on her face. As she saw Qin Yu, she hurriedly said, "Big brother Qin, second senior apprentice brother, has gone into seclusion in the wine cellar. Before eldest senior apprentice brother fell asleep, he told us that if he didn't come out in 3 days, he would have you go and take a look." Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. "All right, I'll go now." Outside the wine cellar, White Phoenix and Iron Mountain were waiting. As they saw Qin Yu arrive, they hurried forwards. "Little junior apprentice brother, do you know what happened?" Qin Yu said, "Senior apprentice brothers, don't worry. I will go in and take a look." In front of him was a small rockery. It seemed as if it had been struck by a heavy sword, causing a crack to appear in the center of the rockery. The crack extended all the way down to the ground. Standing here, one could smell the rich fragrance of wine. This was the hard currency of Peach Garden, the peach blossom wine. He nodded to the two and indicated for Lei Xiaoyu to wait outside. Then his figure flashed and he entered the crack, soon vanishing into the darkness. Chapter 1428. Looking in from the outside, the wine cellar was pitch black, but that was not the case. Not long after stepping into it, a faint light appeared before his eyes. Even though it wasn't intense, it was enough for him to see his surroundings clearly. But it seemed that there was some kind of restraining force within this wine cellar that imprisoned all the light within, not allowing even the slightest bit of it to escape. Therefore, it caused the appearance of pitch black. Qin Yu focused his senses. He could faintly sense a bit of a cryptic aura, but when he wanted to go deeper, he couldn't even begin. His footsteps paused for a moment before he continued forward. The fragrance of the wine became stronger in his nose and mouth. When he breathed it in, he could feel the sweetness and allure. All the way down into the ground, the traces of excavation in the passage were not obvious. There were only a few traces left in the narrow places. It seemed that the wine cellar under the rockery in the peach garden was more like a natural product than a man-made one. As he moved forwards in the dim light, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps approaching him. He raised an eyebrow and stood still. After several breaths of time, he saw his second senior apprentice, brother, slowly step forwards. He looked surprised. "Little junior brother, why are you here?" Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He said, "I heard that second senior apprentice, brother, has gone into seclusion in the wine cellar and hasn't left for 3 days. So I came to see you." Second senior brother nodded. "Thank you for your concern, junior brother. I'm fine, and I'm preparing to leave now," Qin Yu suddenly said. "Although I've been in the peach garden for a long time, this is my first time coming to this wine cellar, and I haven't had a chance to taste peach blossom wine yet. How about I ask senior apprentice brother to lead the way and bring some peach blossom wine out to drink together?" Second senior apprentice brother glanced at Qin Yu and smiled. "Good. Little junior apprentice brother, come with me." After saying that, he turned around and walked back the way he came. Qin Yu stepped forward and followed behind. Perhaps it was because everyone was lost in their own thoughts. No one spoke for a moment. Only the sound of their footsteps echoed in the empty tunnel. He didn't know why, but there was a dark and gloomy feeling about it. Even the shadows beneath the feet of second senior apprentice brother and Qin Yu seemed a bit more strange. After turning an obvious man-made bend, the aroma of the wine suddenly became rich, filling his nose and mouth. Second senior brother stopped and said with a smile, "Little junior brother, we are here." He pointed a finger. "This is the peach blossom wine. Teacher used the peach blossoms in the garden as the base material, and then used the mysteries of this wine cellar to brew it. It is truly the finest wine in the world." In the depths of the ground in front of him, there was a natural depression that formed a round pond. It was filled with wine that was slightly viscous. Under the faint light, it slightly surged and rippled. The rich wine fragrance that he smelled earlier came from this pond. Qin Yu nodded in praise. "It really is good wine." Second brother smiled and said, "In fact, the wine cellar is divided into 2 parts. What you see now is just the big wine pond outside. The peach blossom wine is excellent, but it is not the best." He pointed to a dimly lit spot at the side of the wine cellar. "There's a crack there. Once you pass through it, you'll reach the small wine pond. It's less than 1/3 the size of this place, but the quality of the wine is more than twice as good. When Master was here, he always drank from the small wine pond." The corners of Qin Yu's mouth curled up indiscernibly. "Oh, since there's a better peach blossom wine, of course I have to experience it." Second senior apprentice brother smiled and nodded. "I will lead junior apprentice brother there." Sure enough, in the dimly lit area, there was a common-looking crack. It was just wide enough for one person to pass through. Second senior apprentice brother was clearly familiar with this place. He quickly moved his feet and walked over. Qin Yu's steps slowed down a bit. He reached out a hand and touched the stone wall. It was extremely damp and there was water seeping out. When he looked down, what he saw was a dazzling red. "Junior apprentice brother hasn't arrived yet?" Second senior apprentice brother's voice sounded out in front of him. Qin Yu grasped his hand and said, "I'll be right there." The narrow passage wasn't long, and they soon passed through. The first feeling they felt was a cold chill. The temperature in the air dropped even lower, and the glimmer of light became increasingly dim. And just as second senior apprentice brother said, there was indeed a wine pond. It wasn't too large, and the wine was thicker and thicker, as if it were about to solidify into paste. Seeing Qin Yu come in, second senior apprentice brother's smile became even brighter. He stretched out a hand and said, "This is the small wine pond. It produces the highest quality peach blossom wine. Today, thanks to junior apprentice brother, I will also be able to taste it. I must thank senior apprentice brother for telling me. The air suddenly fell silent. The two people smiled as they looked at each other. Neither of them spoke. That strange feeling suddenly became even stronger. Second senior brother coughed, lightly to break the silence. Junior brother, aren't you going to get the wine? Chinyu smiled. He shook his head and said, Such a precious wine. Just smelling it is enough. I don't like wine by nature. Drinking it is really a reckless waste of God's gift. Second senior brother persuaded again. Since we're already here, let's just take some. Chinyu continued to shake his head. There was another period of silence. Second senior apprentice, brother, suddenly turned around. He looked at Chinyu, his voice gloomy. Why don't you go? Do you want me to invite you personally? As he stared straight at Chinyu, the smile on his face vanished and blood flowed out from the corners of his eyes. Only then did one discover that his second senior apprentice brother's face was incomparably pale, like a corpse that had been buried deep underground for countless years. Chinyu's lips curved up in a smile, and a cold light appeared in his eyes. He thought that he couldn't continue pretending. It seemed his patience was worse than he had imagined. Thank you for your kindness, second senior brother, but I can't afford to drink the wine here. Second senior apprentice brother's voice was even colder. It looks like junior brother really wants me to personally invite you. At this time, blood flowed out from his mouth, nose, and ears. The pale, white skin on his body began to rot, revealing the dark red flesh underneath. But what was strange was that the wine fragrance in the air suddenly rose once more, reaching an inconceivable degree. And most importantly, the fragrance of this wine gave Chinyu an irresistible temptation. It was like a finger that was constantly teasing his heart, making him want to throw himself into the pool of wine in front of him without a care for anything else. Chinyu held his breath, but discovered that this didn't improve the situation. It was as if the temptation of the wine directly affected his soul. Whether he could smell it or not, he couldn't avoid it. Second senior apprentice, brother's entire body began to fester. He opened his mouth to reveal his gums, looking increasingly fierce and horrifying. Junior brother, please come in and drink. Bang, bang, bang. The thick wine in the small wine pond suddenly boiled over. Countless drops of wine shot into the skies, instantly condensing into tentacles that shot towards Chinyu. A cold light exploded in Chinyu's eyes. But at this time his eyes blurred and his reaction slowed down by several beats. The result was that with a light crackling sound, the wine tentacles wrapped around his hands and feet. The wine tentacles instantly tightened. It was like a monster was hiding beneath the small wine pond, wildly pulling at him. The ground beneath Chinyu's feet cracked apart. His feet dug into the ground like a plow, tearing open a long trench. But he couldn't stop himself from being pulled towards the wine pond. During this process, he revealed a struggling expression. But his eyes remained blurred, and he simply couldn't put up any effective resistance. Second senior apprentice, brother's festering became even more severe. His entire body had nearly turned into a pool of viscous flesh and blood. His eyes were completely exposed as he stared straight at Chinyu. The blood vessels on his face bulged out, weaving together in a strange and horrifying manner. A deep and low laugh came from his gums. Come, little junior apprentice brother, this wine is delicious. I'm sure you'll like it. Chinyu was slowly pulled to the side of the small wine pond. With a dull thud, he fell into it. Second senior apprentice, brother's laughter was sharp and filled with eagerness and eagerness. I can eat again. Hungry. I'm really hungry. He turned and walked into the small wine pond. The flesh and blood that constantly dripped down mixed into the wine pond, causing the fragrance of the wine to become even richer. He fell backwards without a single splash of wine. The second senior apprentice brother was like mud as he directly melted into the wine pond. Although the wine pond didn't seem large from the outside, the truth was that it was only on the surface. It actually possessed an astonishing depth. Qin Yu was rapidly dragged down by the tentacles. Even after several breaths of time had passed, he still hadn't reached the bottom. An invisible strength wrapped around him, rapidly forming an icy cold and sticky film on the surface of his body. It was thick and solid to the touch, wrapping around him layer by layer. His field of vision immediately blurred, and it continued to strengthen. If this continued, then it would eventually form a seal that would plunge him into complete darkness. Qin Yu sighed, and the blurriness in his eyes instantly vanished. If he couldn't find the real second senior apprentice brother, then he could only take action. Fortunately, Qin Yu's dilemma didn't continue for too long. With a dull thud, he touched the bottom of the pond. Although his field of vision was blurry, he could still vaguely make out something. Not too far away, he found someone that looked exactly like him, motionless and wrapped in a thick film. Although his vision was blurry, he could still vaguely make out some things. Not far away, he found a person who was now exactly the same as him, motionless and wrapped in a thick layer of sticky film. Although he couldn't make out his true appearance, he could roughly make out his figure. Without a doubt, it was his second senior apprentice brother. Qin Yu let out a sigh of relief. Then his lips curved up in a cruel smile. Although he didn't know, he knew who the person in the wine pool who was pretending to be the second senior brother and knew how to use the body ulceration technique was, but he had obviously not heard of the saying that one should not eat just anyone, or else one would get a stomachache. A sharp light exploded in Qin Yu's eyes. Light surged in his palm, and a sword phantom appeared. How should he put it? The feeling at this moment was probably like being peacefully eaten into someone's stomach without struggling or resisting. Then, when that person turned around and pulled out a shining sword from his chest, this feeling was simply exhilarating. But the wine pond didn't feel exhilarating at all. Think about it. If someone took out a sword from your stomach, even if they didn't swing it or slash at you, that in itself was the greatest harm. In particular, if this sword was extremely fierce and had an astonishing killing power, then the harm would be even greater. The only direct result of this was that with a bang, the wine pond exploded once more. Qin Yu, who had been swallowed up, immediately felt a strong sense of rejection and was forcefully pushed out. Of course, the moment he was pushed out, Qin Yu didn't forget to reach out and grab onto his second senior apprentice brother, who was also at the bottom of the pond. With a light smack, he landed on the edge of the wine pond. He lifted his hand and tore off the film that was now torn to pieces. This thing was in a miserable state, but it wasn't because of Qin Yu, but because of the sword phantom. From the feeling of the fragments, Qin Yu knew that it wouldn't be easy to tear this thing apart with brute force. The sword phantom had already vanished. Although it didn't say anything, Qin Yu rationally gave up on the idea of borrowing its strength. Although this sword had already recognized him as its master, or rather, it had barely recognized him as its master. It was clear that Qin Yu hadn't truly subdued it yet. In other words, Qin Yu wasn't confident that if he continued to provoke it, he wouldn't turn around and be split in half by this sword. Whatever, safety first. He would ask second senior apprentice, brother, to stay in this film for a while longer. In any case, he had already been here for a long time, so a little more time wouldn't matter. The wine pond was still boiling. Within the rich fragrance of wine, there was suddenly a faint smell of blood. Then, the figure that used the great festering art condensed once more. There were no eyelids, but his eyes were still protruding outwards. He glared at Qin Yu, his eyes filled with hatred so deep that they nearly condensed into essence. Ah! A sharp scream came from his gums. It was like a high-speed spinning arrow that pierced into his soul. Qin Yu's face paled. Second senior apprentice brother, who was wrapped in layers of film, couldn't help but twitch and twist in pain. Whoosh! The tentacle held out. But this time, it clearly didn't want to entangle Qin Yu and drag him into the wine pond. It aimed directly at Qin Yu's neck, as if it wanted to give him a clean death in order to dispel the hatred in its heart. But the truth was that the self-eroding art had reached large success, and it had been deceived once more. The moment it screamed, Qin Yu had hidden his own soul. He didn't separate from his mortal body, but he was in another strange space that wasn't the same as this place, so he wasn't injured at all. Thus, the paleness of his face was only a disguise. His goal was to fish, but now the fish had taken the bait. So, facing the whistling tentacle that wanted to behead him, Qin Yu sneered and lifted his hand. With a loud clap, he grasped the tentacle. He stepped forwards. The ground cracked and sank into his ankles. At this moment, Qin Yu gave off the feeling that he had become one with the earth. "Come out!" With a loud shout, he fiercely pulled back. The tentacle immediately stretched taut, like a bowstring. The result of the struggle was that the tentacle rapidly stretched to the sides, making one worry that it would break at any moment. But Qin Yu wasn't worried, because he had already seen through the nature of this tentacle. It was formed from the wine in the pond and was one with it to begin with, unless the other party was willing to cut off its own limbs. If so, then things would be even simpler. After suffering 2 heavy wounds, even if it could escape back to the wine cellar, Qin Yu had plenty of ways to kill it. Indeed, not everyone had the courage to cut off their own wrists. Perhaps the one in the wine pond was well aware of the situation it was facing and was prepared to go all out against Qin Yu. So, when the tentacles tightened to the limit, the entire wine pool erupted. It was like a river had burst through a dam, rushing towards Qin Yu like a raging flood. The great festering art had reached large success. At this time, it opened its gums and ruthlessly bit down at Qin Yu. Chapter 1429. As a veteran fisherman, he certainly wouldn't be bitten by the fish at the other end of the rod. Otherwise, it would be too shameful. Qin Yu stood still, maintaining his previous posture of being one with the earth. Suddenly, he lifted his hand and punched out. When this punch landed, it felt as if the entire earth was suddenly lifted up and then swept out with a crushing momentum. With a dull thud, the roaring flood seemed to hit an extremely high and wide invisible wall in the nothingness. The teeth of the owner of the great art of self-destruction were immediately smashed to pieces. He was like a housefly that was mercilessly sent flying away. As the fragments of his teeth flew out, his body was also rupturing. He was originally like a walking puddle of flesh and blood, but now he was completely smashed and melted back into the wine. This wasn't his original intention, so the taste wasn't much better. A pained and angry roar sounded from the depths of the wine pool. In addition, Qin Yu even felt a trace of grievance. This caused a ruminative look to appear in his eyes. He thought that even with this person's methods, he still felt aggrieved. It could be seen that his experiences over the years weren't very pleasant. What did the yard master do to him at this moment? Countless thoughts flashed through Qin Yu's mind, involving all kinds of gratitude and grudges, and even sad and tortuous love stories. But soon he felt that thinking like this was really disrespectful to the yard master. Even if the relationship between them was more of a business transaction, it was still a bit too much. Another roar erupted from the wine pool. Qin Yu's eyes flashed, and there was a faint sense of amazement in them. The person in the pool was very powerful. In such a short period of time, he had actually found a way to deal with him. This roar was the same as the previous scream. It was a powerful divine sense attack. But what was different from the first one was that it seemed to have locked onto Qin Yu's soul that had escaped into another space. Although he had only lightly touched the space created by the art of concealing divinity and was still far from being unraveled, this was already extremely difficult. If he had enough time, Qin Yu believed that the art of concealing divinity would be broken. But unfortunately, he didn't have a son. So since he wasn't his father, it was impossible for him to be a living target and help him learn the method to deal with him. Without waiting for the person in the wine pool to attack again, Qin Yu lifted his hand and grasped forwards. With a loud explosion, a large amount of wine directly exploded and miserable screams rang out once more. However, this punch was different from the previous one. It wasn't an attack from the outside, but an internal self-destruction. It was precisely because of this that it was all the more terrifying. For the first time, the scream of the person in the pool revealed an expression of fear. This was because it couldn't figure out why Chinyu was able to forcefully deprive it of control over a portion of its soul, causing it to explode and devour itself. And this was also the root cause of the creature in the pool's fear. In its current state, even if its physical body was damaged, it wouldn't be fatal. However, the soul was different. If its soul was destroyed, it would truly die, and it would never have the chance to turn the situation around. Not long ago, it had just seen a glimmer of hope with the help of second senior brother's 100 battles. It had suffered bitterly for so many years, and it finally saw a chance to leave this place and get back everything. How could it be willing to die? No, absolutely not. Rumble, the wine in the pool began to tumble. With a loud explosion, it exploded once more. But this time its target wasn't Chinyu, but the crack that led to the outside world. In a situation where he wasn't fully prepared, if he forcefully escaped from the wine pool, even if everything went smoothly, he would inevitably fall into a period of weakness and even lose a great deal of his strength. But he couldn't care about that right now. Compared to death, this price was completely bearable. He wanted to escape, and he had already taken action. But that didn't mean that Chinyu was willing to let him leave alive. For a strange existence of unknown origin that likely had a grudge against the peach garden, it was certainly better for him to die. You didn't want to leave behind an irreparable disaster for the peach garden in the future because of a moment of so-called benevolence. Of course, the person in the wine pool that had self-destructed had a horrifying and ugly appearance, so Chinyu didn't like him at all. He didn't have the slightest thought of showing mercy. Bang! There was a dull explosion once more. The rapidly escaping wine burst apart from within. With a pitiful scream, it forcefully broke apart from the middle. That bloody and horrifying face appeared in the tumbling wine, its face twisted in pain. With a loud whoosh, all of the wine fell back into the wine pool. His body had been cut off. His body. Unless he had to abandon half of himself, he could only return here and fuse them back together. Abandoning half of himself. It wasn't that the person in the wine pool didn't have such a ruthless and decisive method, but that he hadn't been prepared yet and had to leave the wine pool. This in itself was a tremendous injury. If he were to abandon half of himself, then even if he could escape today, he feared he wouldn't be able to live for long. Who are you? Who are you? The roar of a trapped beast erupted from the depths of the wine pool. Billowing waves of sound shook the ground, echoing outwards, forming a rumbling tide. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't figure out just how Chinyu was able to directly control his soul and cause such serious damage to himself. The truth of the answer was a combined operation, the combined use of Reach the Moon and Defensive Strike. The general summary was to use Reach the Moon to control a portion of the other party's soul. And the reason it could do this was because when this inherited supernatural ability cultivated the soul, there was a shortcut, or perhaps it could be called an unorthodox secret technique. It could forcefully plunder a portion of the target soul and directly transform and absorb it to enhance itself. Of course, this sort of shortcut came with great hidden dangers. If it was used once or twice, it would be fine. At most, it would take some time to slowly digest it. But if it was used too many times, the impurities in the soul would be swallowed up and the mind would be thrown into chaos, causing serious consequences. You didn't want to take this shortcut. So, after he controlled a portion of the soul, he switched to defensive strike mode and forcefully controlled it to self-destruct, creating a powerful killing force. What was similar was that when Chinyu punched out before, it was also a part of the combined operation. It was just that Reach the Moon had been replaced with Pick the Stars. This body transformation, inherited supernatural ability, could allow one to reach the level of becoming one with the earth, borrowing its power to temper one's mortal body. After reaching this step and switching to defensive strike mode, one would be able to strike out with a strike similar to the earth-crushing strike from before, exploding with power. Although it hadn't been long since he obtained it, and he hadn't had the time to deeply cultivate it, Qin Yu could already confirm that the true method of detonating the power of the 5 inherited supernatural abilities was to fuse them together. But then again, there was no supernatural ability in this world that didn't have limitations. No matter how powerful or ridiculous it was, there would always be flaws. It could even be said that the more powerful a supernatural ability was, the greater its flaws would be. Qin Yu didn't know what the flaws of these 5 inherited supernatural abilities were, but the reason he was able to easily roll over this person in the pool was because this person's current state just happened to be tailor-made for him. Thus, he could easily suppress it with a wave of his hand. This didn't mean that this move could be easily replicated and used against anyone. Otherwise, wouldn't Qin Yu be in an invincible state? This wasn't some fantasy, nor was it possible for it to exist. Facing this trapped beast in the pool, Qin Yu's eyes were ice cold. He wasn't in the mood to explain anything to it. Although everyone was curious, this person in front of him was definitely in existence with a great secret. But even if there were benefits, the garden master hadn't been able to obtain them after all these years. Qin Yu didn't believe that he could make it reveal anything in a short period of time. Since that was the case, he might as well just kill it to avoid any complications from arising if he delayed any longer. Thus, facing the roaring beast in the pool, Qin Yu reached out and fiercely clenched his fist once more. Pum! A deep explosive sound erupted from the pool once more. Ah! A pained roar mixed with despair and brutality appeared on the surface of the wine pool. The rotting face glared at Qin Yu. I can surrender. I am willing to continue being suppressed in this wine cellar and produce peach blossom wine for the peach garden. Qin Yu shook his head. I'm sorry. I was telling you the truth before. I really don't like drinking wine, so this proposal isn't tempting to me at all. The face immediately twisted and filled with crazed roars. Don't force me. Don't force me. There is no enmity between us. Rather, it was the peach garden that captured me and suppressed me, locking me in this wine cellar where I never see the light of day. They used my mortal body to brew wine for you to drink and improve your cultivation and talent. Do you think I don't have the qualifications to swallow a disciple of the peach garden? Moreover, he isn't dead yet. As long as you let me go, I will immediately release him and guarantee that from now on, I will never harm anyone in the peach garden. The lady garden master had indeed gone too far with him. Although it was just a simple statement, it was enough to make one break out in a cold sweat. This person seemed to be in a very miserable state. Qin Yu seriously thought about it. He sighed and shook his head. The more you say, the less I trust you. And as you said just now, how can such a deep hatred be easily let go? It is impossible for me to spend all my time in the peach garden in the future, so it is best to clean up any hidden dangers ahead of time. So you can leave in peace. Ah! Rumble, rumble. The wine pool wildly tumbled about. A vortex instantly formed. An entire underground space shook. Space itself was shaking. Kacha! Kacha! Cracking sounds could be heard as cracks appeared in the wine pool. Violent, murderous, and destructive wills were crazily released. The rich fragrance of wine, accompanied by the smell of blood, soared into the sky. All of the wine was rapidly swallowed up by the vortex, and a distorted figure condensed. The flesh and blood on the surface were rotten and scarlet. It was clear that this was the miserable figure that had been suppressed here by the garden master and used to make wine. Now, this figure released an extremely terrifying aura. It was like an evil spirit from hell that wanted to destroy everything and cause death to cover the earth. It had flipped out. Qin Yu grabbed his second senior apprentice brother and rapidly retreated. His ruthless roar was like a thunderclap. You want to leave? You will accompany me to the grave. What responded was the back of Qin Yu's head. He grabbed his second senior apprentice brother and rushed into the crack. He didn't even look back, nor did he pause. The figure in the wine pool lifted a hand and grasped forward. The void instantly turned cold and gloomy. A terrifying aura was about to descend, covering Chinyu and his second senior apprentice brother. But at this moment, with a light hum, the phantom of a stone pagoda suddenly appeared, covering the wine pool and the figure within, isolating Chinyu and his second senior apprentice brother. Bang! With a dull thud, the phantom of the stone pagoda gently shook. It sneered, "Boy, your strength isn't small. But things like resentful spirits aren't much of a threat to me." Schwa! Chinyu stepped into the crack and placed his second senior apprentice brother to the side. He turned and said, "Be careful. Don't collapse the wine cellar." The stone pagoda smiled. "Master, rest assured. Since I made a move, I naturally have confidence in myself." As it spoke, its heart was 30% hot, 30% eager, and the rest was restless. But as it thought about it, it suppressed all of its hesitation. Since it had already decided to trust Chinyu, it couldn't hide anything from him. After all, sooner or later, it would have to face this secret. Chinyu could sense the complex mood fluctuations coming from the stone pagoda. As if thinking of something, his eyes flashed, but he didn't say anything. He nodded and said, "I'll leave it to you." Within the phantom of the stone pagoda, the one trapped in the pool had gone completely insane. He desperately wanted to drag Chinyu and Chinyu down with him, but he was forcefully stopped. His heart was filled with hatred. As he howled, he attacked in a frenzy. His attacks were like a torrential storm as they rained down on the illusory stone tower, causing ripples to spread in all directions. But just as the stone pagoda had said, things like resentful spirits weren't anything to it. At the very least, it didn't show any signs of being damaged. I figured out what you're up to. Moreover, your anger has reached the limit. A resentful spirit in this state often tastes the best." With a low chuckle, the stone pagoda attacked. Chinyu could see tentacles shoot out from the stone pagoda. They were as fast as arrows, sinking into the resentful spirit's body. His entire body instantly curled up. His eyes that were filled with anger, cruelty, and killing intent were instantly filled with pain. What followed was a loud gulp. Gulp, 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 gulp. This move was indeed sharp and direct. Chinyu suddenly felt a cold breeze blow past the back of his head, and all the hairs on his back stood up. He thought back to the time when he had been woken up by the stone pagoda. Could it have been like this? Hiss! Just thinking about it made his hair stand on end. The pained, resentful spirit crazily struggled, erupting with an unprecedented strength. A wild wave of divine sense swept out like a tsunami, repeatedly shaking the stone pagoda phantom. But although the stone pagoda phantom trembled, it didn't show any signs of breaking through. The gulping sounds didn't stop at all. As time passed, the resentful spirit's resistance became increasingly weak. He curled up into a ball, becoming nothing more than a fish on the chopping block. The stone pagoda phantom rapidly became more solid. In a short period of time, Chinyu felt that it had become much more powerful. This swallowing art was quite elegant. How come the stone pagoda didn't show it before? Could it only absorb resentful spirits? That couldn't be right. Chinyu's personal experience was the evidence. How could a living person become food for the stone pagoda? Suddenly, a dignified expression crossed Chinyu's face. He looked at the stone pagoda phantom in front of him and suddenly thought that it was nearly omniscient and omnipotent, although the stone pagoda had always used the excuse that it had done some research during its dark and sunless years as an excuse. Today Chinyu suddenly felt that he might have discovered a more reasonable explanation. For instance, as long as one ate enough, they would naturally understand everything. Chapter 1430. Chinyu suddenly understood that it was only today that the stone pagoda had truly revealed everything to him. He coughed and covered up the strange light in his eyes. In the world of adults, there was a tacit understanding that didn't need to be said too clearly. So at this moment, Chinyu thanked the stone pagoda and pretended that he hadn't seen anything or guessed anything. The stone pagoda was deeply grateful for this. Although it had already prepared itself to be completely exposed to Chinyu's sight, it still didn't want to recall or face the events of the past. Crackle, crackle. Light sounds rang out one after another. The layers of sticky film that wrapped around second senior apprentice, brother's body, began to break apart as the resentful souls vanished. The stone pagoda said, "Master, if there is nothing else, I will return first." Chinyu nodded. With a light hum, the stone pagoda phantom vanished from sight. With a stuffy cough, second senior apprentice, brother opened his eyes. A sharp light surged within them and a strong and wild aura broke out from his body. But soon he realized the situation in front of him. He looked at Chinyu and frowned. Junior apprentice brother? A moment later, after learning the cause and effect of what had happened, second senior apprentice brother revealed a grateful expression. He cupped his hands together and said, "I must thank junior apprentice brother for helping me this time. Otherwise the consequences would have been unimaginable." Chinyu glanced at second senior apprentice brother. Although his eyes were a bit dim, there was still a halo of light swirling in them. He could sense that there was something different in his aura. He smiled and said, "After surviving a calamity, senior apprentice brother seems to have obtained some harvests." Second senior apprentice brother didn't hide anything. He sighed and nodded. "That person in the wine pool, strictly speaking, has some origins with me. Through this matter, I was able to recover some of my forgotten memories. I should be able to break through my current boundary soon." "Congratulations, second senior apprentice brother." 100 Battles shook his head and bitterly smiled. "If it weren't for junior apprentice brother helping me, I fear I would have already died." He took a deep breath and cupped his hands together. "I will remember this matter. In the future, if junior apprentice brother needs me, this life is yours. Please don't hesitate to ask." His fists were firm and sincere. Chinyu smiled and didn't say anything. In truth, what he said before was correct. It was impossible for him to stay in Peach Blossom Garden forever. He even had a faint premonition that he would soon leave. Perhaps it was related to that woman's request. In short, he could help Peach Blossom Garden for a time, but he couldn't help them forever. The best result would be for everyone to become stronger. Let's go. White Phoenix, Iron Mountain, and Xiaoyu are waiting outside. I fear they are worried. Sure enough, when the two of them went out, the first two were still fine. They merely furrowed their brows and looked solemn. But Lei Xiaoyu was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. She could not help but pace back and forth. Big Brother Qin. Lei Xiaoyu's eyes brightened as she saw them and walked over. Bai Feng and Taishan heaved a sigh of relief. However, a trace of hesitation quickly appeared in the depths of the former's eyes. "You, little junior brother, since you've come out safe and sound, you can return what I gave you earlier." Bai Feng smiled and extended her hand. "You," and she, and said, "He, I, he, I, he. He smiled and said, "Third brother didn't give me anything, so don't worry. It's really me and second brother who came out." She, Quan, it's good that you're fine, it's good that you're fine. After pausing for a moment, he continued, "Because I am not very clear about the specific situation of the wine cellar, I did not say much about it in order to prevent junior brother from making a mistake. I hope junior brother will not blame me for my lack of clarity." Qin waved his hand, indicating that it was fine. Second senior brother revealed a trace of embarrassment. He took a deep breath and said, "I was tricked by that person in the wine cellar. It was all thanks to junior brother's help. Otherwise, I might not have been able to return." Even though he had said it very simply, the meaning behind his words was enough to make one's heart tremble. Shock immediately appeared in the eyes of the other party. Qin Yu thought that his second senior brother was quite honest. He met their gazes and nodded. He is a bit of a threat, but after experiencing the tribulation this time, I believe that second senior brother will soon break through. The Peach Garden will have another saint. This was good news, especially after the previous turmoil. For the disciples of the Peach Blossom Garden, every additional saint was an additional layer of protection. Congratulations, second senior brother! Bai Feng, Taishan, and Lei Xiaoyu were overjoyed. Bai Zhanyu couldn't help but reveal a smile. He suddenly thought of something and looked at Qin Yu. I almost forgot. How is junior apprentice, Sister Peach? Qin Yu said, her situation has stabilized. As he spoke, his eyes fell on Lei Xiaoyu. Everything else was left to her. Lei Xiaoyu said, fourth senior apprentice sister is doing very well. It's just that her temperament has become a bit colder. She almost never speaks to anyone. In truth, this was already a tactful way of describing things. Not only had Peach Blossom's temperament become colder, but she was like a block of ice, filled with an icy coldness that no one dared to approach. Qin Yu faintly sensed that she was hiding something. He furrowed his eyebrows and said, in a moment, come with me to take a look. Bai Zhanyu nodded. With junior brother here, I can rest assured. I will go into seclusion for a period of time and strive to make a breakthrough as soon as possible. He was the first to leave. Bai Feng was currently in charge of all the affairs of the Peach Blossom Garden and was also incomparably busy. She and Taishan hurriedly bid their farewells. Qin Yu watched them leave. Then he glanced at Lei Xiaoyu. Tell me the truth. Lei Xiaoyu bitterly smiled. Big brother Qin, even if you didn't say anything, I would have invited you to take a look. There really is something wrong with senior apprentice, Sister Peach, right now. As Qin Yu listened to her speak in detail, he frowned. But he subconsciously let out a breath of relief in his heart. This was because, just as Lei Xiaoyu said, there was indeed something wrong with Peach Blossom. But she didn't seem to have any inclination to commit suicide. Soon, Qin Yu realized that his thoughts were cruel and callous. But he couldn't deceive himself. He bitterly smiled and suppressed these thoughts. Let's go. Let's go and take a look. 3 days later, Qin Yu saw Peach Blossom again. When she swept her eyes over him, it was just as Lei Xiaoyu had said. It was like an icy knife ruthlessly sliced across his body. At the same time, there was also a bone-chilling coldness. However, her attitude towards Qin Yu was different from others. After a moment of silence, she gently nodded and said, Junior brother, you've come. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. I heard that senior apprentice sister's recovery was quite good, so I came to take a look. Peach Blossom said I'm fine. For a time, Qin Yu found that he didn't know what to say. Even if he asked himself honestly, he could be considered someone skilled in the art of speech. Just as he was thinking about what to say that wouldn't touch Peach Maiden's nerves, she suddenly said, Junior apprentice brother, don't worry. Since I've agreed to be treated, I won't easily give up my life. He paused for a moment before continuing, I'm tired. I want to rest for a while. Little junior brother, you can go by yourself. Qin Yu bitterly smiled to himself. He had already made it clear that he was leaving. Then he cupped his hands in acknowledgement and turned to leave. Lei Xiaoyu, who was following behind him, looked at him for a while before turning to look at the courtyard where Peach Maiden was. Her expression was extremely complicated. Qin Yu turned around and rapped her on the forehead. He angrily roared, What nonsense are you thinking about? Peach's current appearance has nothing to do with me. Halfway through his words, he suddenly lost his voice. As he said before, people couldn't lie to themselves. He flicked his sleeves and left, gritting his teeth as he said, In short, it's not what you think. Lei Xiaoyu chased after him. Big brother Qin, I will tell you everything about senior sister Peach Maiden in the future. Wasn't this clearly relying on him? Everything he said just now had been in vain. Qin Yu resisted the urge to turn around and smack her on the forehead again. His face darkened as he quickened his pace. After shaking off Lei Xiaoyu, he returned to his dwelling. Qin Yu rubbed his temples, a bitter smile on his face. Peach Maiden's problem really was a problem. Although she didn't have any inclination to not want to live right now. She definitely wouldn't be able to remain in such a hopeless state for too long. But for the time being, Qin Yu really didn't have any good ideas. He could only temporarily suppress this thought and wait for a later opportunity to solve this problem. If he couldn't solve this problem right now, then he would deal with it later. Qin Yu took a deep breath and calmed his thoughts. He stood up and walked towards the training room. Practice was the only standard for testing, in simpler terms, through the incident with that pitiful, resentful spirit in the exploding hammer wine cellar. Qin Yu had determined just how formidable and mysterious an inheritance supernatural ability was. Moreover, he didn't know whether or not the so-called hidden dangers that the rulers will avatar spoke of were true. Even if it really did exist, Qin Yu couldn't care about such things. Increasing his strength was his top priority right now. First, great changes had occurred in Vast Yang. The ruler's situation of seclusion had likely changed, and this was the most pressing reason. Secondly, although he had smoothly killed the two sages, Zhou and Lin, and even scared off the ruler of a fallen country and the black-robed true sage with just his aura, it seemed that he was extremely awe-inspiring, intimidating all the enemies and stabilizing the situation in the Peach Garden. But no matter what, a grudge had already been formed. This was an indisputable fact. Would the influence behind Saint Zhou and Saint Lin, or perhaps that black-robed true saint, really give up like this? Of course, if they admitted defeat, that would be the best result. Qin Yu wasn't a masochist, and he didn't think that he could rely on the strength of a single strike to defy the heavens, defy the earth, defy the air, and trample everyone beneath his feet. But he had to admit that if things were really as he thought, then there was likely a ruler hidden behind the shadows that truly overlooked Vast Yang. If so, then the possibility of them admitting defeat was nearly negligible. In other words, revenge would definitely come. Moreover, once they were prepared, they only needed to attack to deal with Qin Yu. The enemy was in the dark while he was in the light. Moreover, there was no way to hide. He was nothing more than a shining live target. This feeling was simply terrible. So now, deep in Qin Yu's heart, the desire to constantly become stronger was becoming increasingly intense. Cultivating in seclusion and perceiving the 5 great inheritance, supernatural abilities, all of that was empty. Only having a sufficiently formidable strength was the most fundamental guarantee. And in truth, Qin Yu didn't think too much about this. This was because as he hurriedly went into seclusion, revenge had already been put on the agenda. And the one who did all of this was the influence that the black-robed man represented. They had a very high-level name that also had a bit of style, the Dusk Order. Chapter 1431. The hall was filled with light. Every piece of glazed roof tile shone down, illuminating the figures on the 12 chairs very clearly. In the Haoyang world, the 12 divine thrones of the Dusk Order, which were hidden under the light and hidden from the eyes of the world, were gathered here. The black-robed true saint, who had been frightened away by Qin Yu's hand during the destruction of his country, was one of the 12 divine thrones. At this time he was silent, his expression cold. Deep in his eyes there was anger and resentment constantly surging. The 12 divine thrones were arranged in a circle, forming a perfect circle. Naturally, there was no difference between them. At this time, a cold voice sounded out from underneath a black robe. What happened during the destruction of my country? The 7 divine thrones retreated without a fight, causing my Twilight Order to be defeated for the first time. He had been named. After a moment of silence, a cold and gloomy voice sounded out. The Peach Garden Ninth Qin Yu is hiding a great secret. Although I didn't fight him, I could feel the threat of death. If I hadn't retreated that day, I might have died on the spot. The hall was silent. After several breaths of time, one of the divine thrones slowly said, When the 7 divine thrones attacked, they had a supreme treasure bestowed upon them by his honor. Unless someone on the level of his honor arrived, who could resist? Therefore, we cannot accept such an explanation. This was, of course, a more elegant way of saying it. The more direct explanation was, "You must be hiding something." The 7 god Seat's face twitched. He could feel the anger surging in his chest. However, he was not an impatient young man. He sneered and said in a deep voice, "If you don't believe me, you can personally go and test it out." This was clearly the most direct and effective method. The hall fell silent, as if they were choked by these words. The Peach Garden Nineteen knew had killed Saint Joe and Saint Lin on the spot. Even if the divine thrones were powerful, without his honor's treasure, they weren't confident they could contend with him. Rashly knocking on their door, rather than saying they were testing the truth, it was more like they were rushing thousands of miles to deliver their heads. Just as everyone was getting angry and thinking about whether they should join forces to teach the 7 god Seats a lesson, a ball of light suddenly appeared in the ring-shaped space. At first, it was just a dot, but in the blink of an eye, it expanded to the size of a human head. The surface of the light gently moved, and a face appeared indistinctly. Everyone was slightly startled, and they hurriedly stood up and bowed. "Greetings, Your Honor." Within the Dusk Order, he was the only existence that stood above the 12 divine thrones. He couldn't be called directly by his name, nor could he be called directly by his realm. Thus, he was crowned with the words "Venerable One" to show that his status was extremely respected. Within the ball of light, the blurry face spoke. This matter was a mistake in the gathering of information. The fault does not lie with the 7 god Seats. "Yes, Your Honor," everyone said respectfully. Since his honor had personally endorsed the 7 gods, it naturally meant that the 7 gods did not lie. Regarding this, they could trust it. But even so, the matter did not end there. The 2 saints, Zhou and Lin, were killed on the spot, and the 7 god Seats fled without a fight. This had caused a huge blow to the prestige of the Order of Dusk. To the divine thrones who wanted to rebuild the Dusk Order in the midst of the turmoil in vast Yang City, this was a difficult matter to accept. "Your Honor, the matter of the Peach Garden is too great. We must give an explanation. Otherwise it will cause the hearts of the people to scatter, and it will be difficult for us to act in the future. Indeed, we serve the name of order. If we were to suffer a defeat in the Peach Garden, that would be looked down upon by others. Your Honor must think of a way to reverse the situation as soon as possible. The longer we delay, the greater the impact of this matter will be." The divine thrones all spoke up, their voices unable to conceal their worry. Within the ball of light, the blurry face's mouth opened and closed. "I already know what you are talking about. The Peach Garden's Chinyu will die, and the Peach Garden will also be destroyed. At that time, all of this will vanish and things will return to normal." The 12 divine thrones stood up and bowed. "Your Honor's Tao is boundless." They didn't doubt these words at all. At practically the same time as the 12 divine thrones revealed cold smiles, in a distant place, something else was happening. In the barren wilderness, perhaps because of the arrival of the cold autumn season, all the vegetation had withered and turned yellow. There was a desolate and deathly silence. In this withered and yellow landscape, there was a small temple. From the surface, it seemed to have been in disrepair for many years. Mottled and damaged, it exuded a desolate and decadent aura. Half of the temple's main door was broken, and the other half was also weak. It could barely hang on the door frame. If one looked through the cracks, they could see that there were 2 clay statues placed on the altar within. It was clear that because they had withstood the baptism of time, the 2 statues were heavily mottled, and it was impossible to make out their expressions. There was only a faint trace of dignity left in their outlines. Suddenly, a wind rose up within the temple, stirring up dust. The 2 statues on the altar nearly opened their eyes at the same time. The mouth of the left statue moved, emitting an extremely soft sound. It was very, very soft. Even though one was very close, they still had to listen very carefully to make sure they could hear it clearly. It was like the statue was guarding against something in order to prevent its actions from being sensed by some unknown existence. The person you are looking for has already been found. The taboo of the right statue seemed to have lessened by a great deal. Its voice rose several octaves, clearly conveying its attitude. There seemed to be a bit of resentment in its voice. "Who is it? Tell me." The left statue said, "We cannot be sure right now, but through this person, you should be able to find the truth. Speak." The voice of the left statue suddenly fell even lower. It barely managed to hear the words. Sword sect before it fell silent. Woo! Another gust of wind blew past. The two statues closed their eyes and fell silent, as if nothing had happened at all, and everything that happened before was just an illusion. But at this time the feeling these two statues gave off was much more decayed and dispirited than before, as if they had withstood some invisible backlash. The great calamity of Vastyong had arrived. Qin Yu had returned from his trip to the Peach Garden, and he had killed Saint Zhou and Saint Lin in the midst of a fallen nation. This was a matter that everyone in the world of Vastyong knew of, including the netherworld saint who had died at his hands. 3 of the world's peak existences at the Permitha true saint level had perished at his hands. For a time, Qin Yu's reputation rose even higher. He faintly surpassed ordinary true saints and became the strongest existence below the ruler. But in the eyes of some people who knew more, the descriptions of Qin Yu in the rumors were extremely inaccurate. For instance, the Eastern Sea Dragon Saint. 3 true saints? Haha, you people are far too naive. How could you even begin to imagine Qin Yu's true methods? In the past, the master and disciple of the Peach Garden had used a shameless method to forcefully snatch away the supreme treasure of the Eastern Sea that originally belonged to him. Wasn't Lord Dragon Saint angry? Of course not. But why didn't the Dragon Saint get involved? When he attacked the Peach Garden, he didn't even express his stance. Was it because he was magnanimous and repaid evil with good? Bah! Wasn't it because he was afraid? So what if the Garden Master died? The Peach Garden still had Qin Yu. This boy was a ruthless character. In the eyes of the Dragon Saint, he was even more terrifying than the Garden Master. As long as he was there, the Peach Garden wouldn't fall. Whoever rushed forward first would be the unlucky one. The facts proved Lord Dragon Saint's thoughts. The 2 sages, Zhou and Lin, who died on the spot, were the best evidence. In this kind of environment where a true saint could suddenly die and everyone was in danger, some things that happened quietly seemed very inconspicuous. For example, the change in the Heavenly Sword sect. Although it had a long history and its influence wasn't weak, it was still only at the semi-saint level. It didn't attract too much attention. In fact, no one knew what had happened. It seemed that the Heavenly Sword sect had provoked a strong enemy and was suppressed in a day. And to be able to casually crush a sword sect with a profound background of a semi-saint, naturally only a true saint could do it. This fact caused those who wanted to help the Heavenly Sword sect to only think about it for a moment before suppressing it without hesitation. The world had changed greatly. Chaos had arrived, and everyone was in danger. To be a good person, one had to bear the risk. And the terror represented by a true saint was enough to scare away most people who didn't have strong friendships. After all, not everyone was like Qin Yu of the Peach Garden, who could kill a true saint as easily as chopping melons and vegetables. In the current situation, the power and deterrence of a true saint might be shaken, but their level was still so high that it made people's hearts palpitate. Qin Yu stopped his closed door cultivation again. This time it was because of the 1,000 face. The stone tower had been monitoring her breath, and now it had reached the point where it had to intervene. Without alerting anyone, Qin Yu quietly came out of his closed-door cultivation and appeared outside the courtyard where the 7th senior sister lived. The eldest senior brother was still recovering, and no one knew when he would really wake up. The other disciples of the Peach Garden, including Bai Feng, who had already stepped into the divine path, were all diligently cultivating, striving to advance further as soon as possible. Therefore, no one noticed Qin Yu's current actions. He looked at the tightly shut door of the small courtyard, thought for a moment, and directly knocked on the door. No one answered, but Qin Yu knew that the seventh senior sister was inside, so he patiently repeated the knocking action. Finally, a slightly helpless voice sounded out, "Who is it?" Qin Yu's eyes flashed. "Seventh senior apprentice sister. Qin Yu requests an audience." After a pause, the Thousand Faces voice continued, "It's junior apprentice brother. It's not convenient for me to see you right now, so I'll go back first." Qin Yu shook his head. "I came here to help senior apprentice sister, and my attitude towards helping others has always been firm. If you don't open the door, I can only force my way in." After another period of silence, the Thousand Face lightly said, "If that's the case, then junior apprentice brother, come in." The courtyard door opened and Qin Yu stepped in. The Thousand Face was sitting under the peach tree that was related to her aura. Now that the peach blossoms were in full bloom, a light fragrance lingered in his nose. She had a strange but charming face. She frowned and said, "You see me? If junior apprentice brother doesn't have anything else to say, then please leave." Qin Yu sat down and smiled. "Those who come from afar are guests, and those who come recently are also guests. So, I ask seventh senior apprentice, sister, to bring me a cup of tea." The Thousand Face frowned. She stared at Qin Yu. "I advise you to leave now." Qin Yu tapped a finger on the table. "If I don't drink the tea, I won't leave." The Thousand Face clenched her teeth. She took a deep breath and left. Soon, she returned and placed a cup of tea in front of Qin Yu. "Hurry up and drink it. Once you're done, you'll leave." "Thank you, senior apprentice sister." Qin Yu smiled. He picked up the teacup and sniffed it. He praised, "Good tea. Senior apprentice sister has a collection, so how about you give me some? After all, drinking too much wine is harmful to the body, but tea can still be drunk." The Thousand Face stared at Qin Yu. Her eyebrows were tightly furrowed and her body tensed up, as if she were enduring something. "Junior apprentice brother, you really should leave. Why drag yourself into unnecessary troubles?" After a pause, she lightly said, "I admit that there are indeed some problems right now, but this isn't important. I have confidence in how to deal with them." Qin Yu took a sip of tea. "Good. Since senior apprentice sister says so, I won't meddle in this anymore." He lifted the teacup. "I will keep my word. Once I finish this cup of tea, I will naturally leave." The Thousand Faces' complexion relaxed a little. She sat down across from him. "All right." The courtyard fell silent. Only the sound of Qin Yu drinking tea could be heard. His movements were gentle and his speed wasn't too fast or too slow. The amount of tea continued to decrease. Just as it was about to reach the bottom, the Thousand Faces' complexion began to pale. Large beads of sweat began to appear on her forehead. She clearly had a pained appearance, but the charm on her face only became thicker. On the contrary, the depths of the Thousand Faces' eyes became increasingly cold. It was like someone was slowly awakening within her and constantly eroding her consciousness. "You should leave." She clenched her teeth, her body shivering. Qin Yu raised an eyebrow. "I haven't finished drinking the tea yet." The Thousand Face coughed. In front of Qin Yu, she suddenly changed her face. She was as beautiful and moving as ever. But as her face changed, the feeling she gave off also changed. Walala! Above her head, the peach tree swayed without wind. Large swathes of peach blossoms sprinkled down. "Qin Yu, right? I'm very curious as to how you discovered me." The Thousand Face chuckled. She stared at Qin Yu with a playful look in her eyes. His figure was reflected in her eyes, incomparably clear like two mirrors. At this moment, an invisible and terrifying aura covered Qin Yu. He bitterly smiled, thinking that he was done for. Things had gotten out of hand. The stone pagoda had misled him. This person was far stronger than he had imagined. Before he could carry out his plan to eliminate her, he would have to abandon it. Moreover, if he wasn't careful, the entire peach garden would be endangered. The consequences would be inconceivable when had this world become so dangerous. How could anyone live like this? Now that the thousand face was looking at him, even though she hadn't done anything, Chinyu felt as if he had been stabbed by an axe. It was like if he wasn't careful, he would be cut apart by a cold light. Hiss! This feeling was terrifying to the extreme. But with things having come this far, there was clearly no room for retreat. Moreover, Chinyu asked himself if he had the strength to resist. For instance, that sword and that woman. In a critical moment, what he could rely on wasn't his own strength. This was truly a sad and sorrowful matter. Chinyu's heart of becoming stronger was stimulated once more. He thought that if he could safely survive today, he would have to work even harder in his cultivation. He steadied his mind and cupped his hands together. Distant and unknown, mysterious and formidable existence, the reason I have appeared here today is to make a deal with you. The thousand faces' lips curved up. You want to save her? Chinyu didn't deny it. He directly said, I will give you sufficient compensation. The thousand face lifted a hand and rapped the table. She coldly said, Strictly speaking, she is already my prey. If you want to take away my prey, that is a very offensive matter. The rapping paused and her voice became even colder. So, I must obtain more compensation in order to quell my anger. At that time, I might consider your unreasonable request. Chapter 1432. It was good that he was willing to make a bid. It was better than fighting over a disagreement. Although Chinyu believed that he still had some cards in his hand, it was best not to make a big fuss. He steadied his mind and did his best to appear calm and composed. He raised a hand. Please speak. Across from him, the thousand-faced assassin looked at him, a faint smile in her eyes. Chinyu's thoughts stirred. This meant that he would take the initiative to make a bid. He thought for a moment and said, A true saint-level soul. The stone pagoda had already roughly explained to Chinyu what had happened to the thousand-faced assassin. He also knew what the true goal of these terrifying existences that loved to cross endless space and sign contracts with others was. So, what he offered was certainly what the other party was most interested in. The thousand-faced assassin sneered. Who are you looking down on? These words were a bit direct. Chinyu's heart shrank. He looked at her, and his first thought was that the reward wasn't enough. He had to continue increasing it. But before he could speak, he was stopped by the stone pagoda. Master, do not fall for her trap. The thousand-faced assassin might have some areas that interest him, but a true saint-level soul is more than enough to exchange for her. This sort of mysterious existence is usually crazy and greedy. If they judge that you are willing to pay a higher price to save the thousand-faced assassin, things will become very troublesome. Chinyu's heart chilled. He agreed with the stone pagoda's judgment. After a brief pause, he revealed an awkward expression and bitterly smiled. Mysterious and formidable existence. A true saint soul is more than enough to compensate for your losses. I hope you can carefully consider this. The thousand-faced assassin began to tap the table again. She stared at Chinyu with icy cold eyes. A true saint soul for this woman is indeed a good deal. But it is different for you. After all, slaughtering a saint should be very simple for you. She brightly smiled. I am also well aware of the matter of killing 2 true saints in one fell swoop during a fallen nation. Chinyu's lips twitched. What was this? Was he showing off his wealth? This mysterious existence that occupied the thousand-faced assassin's body clearly knew that he had captured the souls of Saint Zhou and Saint Lin. Thus, he didn't hesitate to demand such an exorbitant price. He had to resolve this matter as soon as possible. If he continued to be entangled, he didn't know what other requests he would make. Chinyu calmed himself. He cupped his hands together and said, "What you say isn't wrong, but all transactions in this world must be reasonable and fair. As an unknown and formidable existence in space and time, I believe you will uphold this principle." He looked up. "So, please state your price." The thousand-faced assassin gently tapped the table as if he were thinking. After several breaths of time, he chuckled. "I want a complete, true divine." She stared at Chinyu. The tapping speed of her fingers became even slower, but it gave off an increasingly invisible pressure. "Remember, it has to be complete. His flesh and blood, his soul, none of it can be missing." Chinyu had a troubled look on his face. To him, killing a true sage was not a difficult task. However, to suppress a true sage and then sacrifice him was simply too difficult. There was basically no possibility of success. In fact, even a hegemon might not be able to accomplish such a feat. The true saint of the Nirvana realm had already condensed the great Tao. Even if it was difficult for him to resist and get caught, it was not difficult for him to end his own life. After all, even an idiot would know that once he was sacrificed to those mysterious and formidable unknown existences in space, the consequences he faced would probably be even more terrifying than death. The thousand-faced assassin raised his hand and pointed in front of him. The black flames instantly exploded and turned into a scroll. At that moment, it unfurled on its own. As the tongues of fire swam on its surface, they condensed into strange runes. "Once you sign this contract, the next true sage you kill will naturally become my sacrifice. So, things are not as difficult as you think. As long as you kill another true sage, we can complete the deal." Qin Yu's complexion changed. Although the stone tower did not explain too much, he was filled with dread towards these strange, mysterious, and formidable existences that hid in space and time. Signing a contract with them was tantamount to dancing on the tip of a knife. If he was not careful and fell, he would be pierced through from inside out and suffer an extremely tragic fate. Towards this, he instinctively resisted. "Are you suspecting that I have ulterior motives?" The thousand-faced assassin narrowed his eyes and suddenly sneered. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "You are thinking too much. I have no such intentions." As he spoke, he had already urged the stone tower to quickly figure out what was written on this contract. Fortunately, the stone tower had done some research in this area and quickly replied, "Master, there is no problem with the contract. But you must guarantee that within a month you will kill a true sage and offer him as a sacrifice. Otherwise, according to the contract, you will be used as a substitute and become his prey." Hiss! This fellow was truly sinister. At least from the beginning until now, he had never reminded Chinyu that there was a time limit to the contract. A month seemed like a long time, but to a cultivator it was often nothing more than a small period of seclusion. If Chinyu didn't know this, then he would be in deep trouble after a month passed. "Are you sure there are no other problems with the contract?" The stone tower gave an affirmative reply. "In truth, there is one thing that Master is not wrong about. The reason that these mysterious existences are able to continue existing since ancient times is because they keep their promises. Perhaps they will play some tricks that are allowed by the rules, but they will not lie about the contents of the contract." Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu flicked his finger and a drop of blood flew out. It fell onto the flame contract and fused into it. The flames on its surface immediately turned the color of blood. At the same time, a binding strength appeared in Qin Yu's senses. It shot into the skies and sank into the dark nothingness, connecting with a distant existence. The thousand-faced assassin revealed a satisfied smile. "Very good. The contract has been signed. I will let her go for now." After a pause, her eyes flashed. "I know that it isn't easy to hunt true saints in your world, so this matter isn't urgent. You can arrange it as you see fit. Before this, I will do my best to restrain my desire to eat her so that her fragile soul isn't harmed." Qin Yu cursed the thousand-faced assassin's sinister intentions. He stood up and bowed. To the mysterious and formidable existence of space-time, I thank you for your generosity and tolerance. Schwa, the thousand-faced assassin's face changed again. At the same time, the consciousness that controlled this body also changed. The mysterious existence that arrived here through the power of the contract had already retreated. The thousand-faced assassin opened her eyes, revealing a dim light and a trace of fear. The thousand-faced assassin looked at Chinyu and forced out a smile. "Thank you, little junior apprentice brother." Chinyu said, "I won't ask about the specific reason. I will also help senior apprentice sister resolve this matter." He sighed and said, "In the future, do not sign a contract with these mysterious existences again. Luck was good this time, but good luck won't always be with us." Indeed, the thousand-faced assassin's luck was very good. She had encountered this mysterious existence of space-time that still possessed a clear consciousness and the ability to think. If it weren't for this, then after the contract expired or some other agreement was fulfilled, her soul would have been swallowed up and there would have been no chance to save her. The thousand-faced assassin revealed a solemn expression. "Little junior apprentice brother, rest assured that I will absolutely not do something like this again in the future." She lowered her head and sighed. She reached into her chest, and immediately there was a rubbing sound. Chinyu stiffened. He thought to himself, "Seventh senior apprentice sister, what is the meaning of this? Although I did save you, I didn't have any other thoughts. But thinking about it, seventh senior apprentice sister could change her beautiful face every day. If he was with her, he would be the same as a groom every night. Eldest senior apprentice brother is so lucky." As Chinyu was seriously considering whether or not he should quickly slip away, seventh senior apprentice sister finally took out something from her chest. So she didn't want to take off her clothes. Chinyu let out a sigh of relief, but he also couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. He cursed himself in his heart. Indeed, men were creatures that were easily dominated by their lower half. Cough! Chinyu lightly coughed. He tried his best to appear calm and collected, trying to cover up some of his emotions. Luckily, seventh senior apprentice sister's mind was focused on the object in her hand, and she didn't notice anything. She glanced at him and said, "The reason I was able to survive the great calamity in the past was because of this object. I don't know what it is, but it is incomparably strange and possesses all sorts of inconceivable abilities." As she spoke to hear, the thousand-faced assassin paused for a moment. Then she sighed and said, "I originally thought that I could rely on this object to take revenge, but it seems that I overestimated my own abilities. I've never been able to truly obtain this object's approval. There's no meaning in keeping it in my hands any longer. Today, I will give it to little junior apprentice brother to express my gratitude." Chinyu wanted to wave his hand and say that senior apprentice sister was being too serious. They were both disciples of Peach Blossom Garden, so it was only natural for me to save her, but he couldn't say it. Or it could be said that he didn't dare to say it. This was because when the thousand-faced assassin took out the object in her hand, the sword of the East Sea that existed in his body, but he couldn't sense it at all, much less lock onto it, suddenly reacted. Its meaning was simple and clear. It wanted this object. Would Chinyu dare to refuse? Although the sword of the East Sea's reaction wasn't that intense, this was the first time it had reacted like this. Chinyu didn't believe that the object in the thousand-faced assassin's hand wasn't important. "You dare to refuse? Humph. Do you believe that I'll split you in half with a swing of my sword?" Chinyu coughed again and said, "Thank you, seventh senior apprentice sister. In that case, it would be impolite of me to refuse." In front of him, the thousand-faced assassin's face revealed a trace of surprise. She really did want to give this object to him, but she didn't expect that her little junior brother would accept it without any hesitation. However, she didn't think too much about it. She only thought that her little junior brother might have sensed some of the magical aspects of this treasure. He reached out and took the object in the thousand-faced assassin's hand. It was a round bead the size of a knuckle. It looked like some sort of red pearl. Its surface was smooth and round, and it naturally emitted a faint halo. When it fell into Qin Yu's hand, the red bead suddenly lit up. Then, with a buzz, it disappeared. As the 7th senior apprentice sister saw this, she immediately confirmed her previous guess. She sighed with emotion and looked at Qin Yu. As I thought, this bead was in my hands. Perhaps it has always been waiting for its true master. Now that I've handed it over to my little junior brother, it can be considered a pearl that has seen the light of day again. It's better than continuing to be covered in dust in my hands. Qin Yu's mouth moved, but in the end he only smiled and didn't say anything. Did he want to say that he actually didn't know anything, that he didn't want this bead, and that he didn't even know what it was called? Cough, cough. This gave off the feeling that he was still pretending to be obedient after getting a bargain. However, this incident also proved one thing from the side. Good people really did have good karma. Although Qin Yu didn't know what the bead was, just the fact that it could attract the sword of the East Sea's interest was enough to show how precious it was. If he hadn't helped the 1,000-faced assassin, Qin Yu naturally wouldn't have today's harvest. This fact tells us that we should try our best to be a good person within our capabilities. Perhaps we won't be able to obtain anything in a short period of time, but fate's compensation might have already been arranged, just waiting for a suitable time to be delivered into your hands. Returning to the main topic, Qin Yu cupped his hands and said, I won't hide it from senior apprentice sister. This bead is indeed useful to me. I will handle this matter properly. Senior apprentice sister, please rest assured. Since he had taken someone else's item, he naturally had to do things. To kill a true saint within a month. Oh, who should he start with? Although he had many enemies, most of those at the true saint level were already dead. The black-robed true saint who was scared away during the destruction of his country, or the powerful force behind him. But when it came to revenge, Qin Yu could only passively endure it. How could he jump out and make arrangements? If the other party wasn't willing to make a move, then there was nothing he could do. No matter how he thought about it, there wasn't a single person who was tactful enough to deliver their head to him on their own initiative. This circle of enemies wasn't large enough. As his thoughts raced, Qin Yu stood up and bid his farewells. 7th senior apprentice, sister, had just narrowly escaped death. Even if she appeared calm on the surface, her heart was still shaken. It was best to give her some time alone to sort out her thoughts. Little junior apprentice brother, take care. I won't send you off. Senior apprentice sister, please wait. After leaving the courtyard, Qin Yu took a deep breath. He couldn't help but rub his temples. He thought that he had only been saving people during this period of time. He hadn't thought he was so important before. Was this the so-called Greater One's strength? The Greater One's responsibility? He shook his head and suppressed these thoughts. There was still a month left, and he wasn't in a hurry to slaughter a saint. Thus, he would return first and go into seclusion for several more days. He had just reached a small juncture in perceiving the 5 inherited supernatural abilities. If he could smoothly cross it, then he would truly have crossed the threshold. When he used them, their might would rise. This feeling of being able to clearly feel his own strength constantly growing was truly refreshing. As Qin Yu hurried back to his courtyard to continue his seclusion, he didn't know that the matter of him saving people had not ended here. Moreover, he would soon discover that the idea that his circle of enemies wasn't large was ridiculously wrong. This was because the number of true saint heads that were about to be delivered to him was far greater than he had imagined. Xianji's face was pale and her eyes were filled with fear. She lifted her hand and slashed forward. After tearing apart space, she stepped into it without hesitation. Something had happened to the Heavenly Sword sect. The other party's target was Ling Xiao, but it wasn't just him. Thinking of this, Xianji's entire body turned cold and her face paled even more. Chapter 1433. There were mountains along the banks of the river. The mountains stretched into the skies, and the highest peak was called Sky Split Peak. This was the place where a half-saint was suppressed. The sky-split sword sect, which had many heroic disciples, was located here. But today, there were no sword lights howling through the skies. There was only a deathly silence in the air. At the peak of Sky-Split Peak, two figures stood there. They watched as Xian Shu tore through space and left, a cold light surging in their eyes. She has already left with the news. If there isn't an accident, she will soon bring back the true leader of World Zeroes. A person lightly said, his tone calm. The other person was silent for a moment. Then he said, I feel that there is something strange about this. We should be careful lest we are used by others. Humph. So what if we are used? In the end, we will find that person and tear him to shreds. Only then can the hatred in our hearts be dispelled. The second person sighed. He turned and said, Let's go. Make all preparations. I feel a bit uneasy. I fear that a tough battle will be inevitable. The person surging with killing intent nodded. Although he wished he could immediately kill that person, to be able to control all of this and destroy the Western Desolates, many years of painstaking preparation. He definitely wasn't someone easy to deal with. It wasn't wrong to have such a strong killing intent, but they couldn't be careless in the slightest. The two people turned and left. As they stepped out, the air rippled. Then, like a stone falling into water, they vanished from sight. Within the training room, Qin Yu let out a long breath. Then he opened his eyes. A sharp light surged within them, but it was difficult to conceal his joy. He had broken through. The process was more difficult than he had imagined, but it was also within his expectations. After all, there had never been such a harvest in this world. The stronger the power of the 5 inherited supernatural powers, the more difficult it was to cultivate them. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed his shaken mind. After sensing for a moment, his lips curved up in a smile. Although he didn't have time to experiment, he could already feel that after reaching the next level, there were some marvelous changes that had occurred when the inherited supernatural powers cooperated with each other. But that didn't mean he didn't have any regrets. After cultivating to this step, there was no way for him to continue rapidly increasing his strength. Afterwards, he would slowly increase his proficiency. Only when he advanced to the next level would his strength increase by a large margin. In other words, Qin Yu's period of seclusion had temporarily ended. And from the time he had signed a contract with the mysterious existence within 7th Senior Apprentice, Sister's body, 13 days had already passed. There were still 17 days left, a little more than half. He needed to kill a Permethought true saint within this period of time and sacrifice him to that person. Time was already very tight. Unless Qin Yu disregarded everything else and casually killed a true sage, he would have to start preparing. I'll go look for 3rd Senior Brother now and ask him if there are any other true divines who have ill intentions other than the dead sages Zhou and Lin. He stood up and pushed open the door, heading straight for Bai Feng's courtyard. The good news was that Bai Feng was very busy as the person in charge of the Peach Blossom Garden. She had to deal with many affairs, so she was not in seclusion. But the bad news was that Qin Yu received a negative answer from him. Unwilling to give up, he asked again, Really? Bai Feng nodded seriously. She glanced at his furrowed brows and asked hesitantly, Little junior brother, is there something wrong? Qin Yu waved his hand and said, This is my private matter and has nothing to do with the Peach Blossom Garden. 3rd Senior Brother, you can rest assured. Bai Feng's eyebrows arched up. She took a deep breath and said, Little junior brother is someone from the Peach Blossom Garden. Your matters are naturally the matters of the entire Peach Blossom Garden. After she finished speaking, she seemed to think of the great disparity in strength between them. Her aura suddenly weakened by a great deal. Although we might not be able to help you, little junior brother might as well tell us. Perhaps we can help you think of a way. Qin Yu bitterly smiled inwardly. He glanced at White Phoenix's earnest expression. If he continued to be ambiguous, then he might really hurt third senior apprentice brother's face. It was impossible to keep this matter a secret. He would know sooner or later. Qin Yu directly said, "Because of some reasons, I need to kill a true sage within 17 days, and third senior brother should know that I don't like killing the innocent. So it's best if I can find a sufficient reason. That's why I came to ask you." His words were clear and straightforward, without the least bit of concealment. But why did it sound so strange to me? When did killing a true sage become something that could be casually mentioned? But thinking about it carefully, it wasn't strange if it was Qin Yu. After all, not too long ago, he had killed Saint Zhou and Saint Lin. He really couldn't help it all. Bai Feng's lips twitched. "Little junior brother, it's best if you do some screening, cough cough. After all, cultivation isn't easy, and becoming a Permitha true sage is even more difficult. If they were killed by you for no reason at all, that would be too aggrieving." Inflated, I'm really inflated. As a mere half-saint, he actually dared to participate in a discussion about killing a true sage, and even put forward a suggestion. Hiss! However, I actually thought that it would be easy for Qin Yu to kill a true sage. If he wanted to kill, he would definitely be able to. Indeed, the adaptability of humans was far too strong. I've already begun to accept that Qin Yu could easily kill a true sage. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "Thank you for the reminder, third senior apprentice brother. I will pay attention." He hadn't been able to obtain the information he wanted from by phone. He already felt that he didn't have much time left, and now he felt even more pressed for time. Without further delay, he bid farewell to Bai Feng and then turned to leave. He felt that he couldn't stay in the peach garden any longer. He had to go out and find a chance to kill a true sage. After all, the great calamity had descended upon vast Sun City. This was a time of upheaval, and the saints weren't willing to be left out, so most of them would take action. As Qin Yu was considering whether or not he should go to the East Sea, well, the slogan of slaying a dragon was enough to make one's blood boil with excitement, but Qin Yu didn't have such thoughts. After all, the dragon sage was a fundamentally good dragon. Moreover, the dragon sage had gifted him the East Sea sword. Qin Yu had personally experienced the might of this sword, and it could be said that besides that woman, it was the sharpest card in Qin Yu's hand. Just this point alone made it hard for Qin Yu to do something like biting the hand that fed him, or tearing down the dragon after crossing the river. The reason he went to the East Sea was to make a deal with the dragon sage. For instance, if he helped him kill an enemy, he would receive some benefits in return. Cough, cough. I'll just take it as an extra harvest from cutting grass and hitting a rabbit. After all, the dragon sage had once produced a sharp treasure like the East Sea sword. Qin Yu silently increased the wealth of the East Sea by several levels. Perhaps there would be a pleasant surprise. Just as Qin Yu made up his mind and was about to put it into action, someone outside the peach garden asked to see him. With Qin Yu's current status in the peach garden, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the successor of the garden master. In the eyes of all the cultivators of the peach garden, he was their thigh and guardian. Anything that involved him would naturally be placed at the top of the list. Therefore, even though it was crowded outside the peach garden with a large number of people waiting to be summoned, the report was placed in front of Qin Yu at the fastest speed possible. Qin Yu probed the jade slip with his divine sense and saw the person who asked to see him. He raised his eyebrows and looked up, saying, "Bring her in." Although she had guessed that her request wouldn't be rejected, being summoned so quickly still made Xianji happy. This showed that Mr. Ninth had no intention of declining. She hurriedly entered the peach garden. She didn't have time to appreciate the atmosphere of this top holy land of vast Sun City. She arrived outside Qin Yu's small courtyard. "Mr. Ninth, Miss Xianji has arrived." Qin Yu's voice sounded out as the courtyard doors opened. "Let her in." The peach garden cultivator who led the way moved to the side. He bowed and said, "Please." Xianji nodded. She quickly walked into the courtyard. Her eyes swept around and fell onto Chinyu, who was standing in the courtyard. "Greetings, Mr. Ninth." Chinyu glanced at her and said, "You look a little flustered. Did something happen?" Xian Ji hurriedly said, "Mr. Ninth, something has happened to the Heavenly Sword sect." Ling Zhao's figure appeared in his mind. He looked in front of him and saw Xian Ji's anxious and restless face. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. "Explain in detail." Xian Ji immediately recounted how she heard that something had happened to the Heavenly Sword sect and how she secretly went to investigate. There was a bit of apprehension in her eyes. She could only try her best to appear objective and not threaten Chinyu. "That's what happened. I discovered that they were interrogating people from the Heavenly Sword sect and that they were involved behind the scenes of World Zeroes. I didn't dare to delay and hurriedly left. Then I came to the Peach Garden." Chinyu rubbed his temples. "You are saying that you snuck in and then came back out?" Xian Ji nodded. Chinyu sighed inwardly. He glanced at her. Although he didn't say anything, Xian Ji was still a smart woman. She had already sensed some things from his eyes. Her complexion changed, paling and helpless. "Mr. Ninth, are you saying that they discovered me and deliberately let me go?" Chinyu lightly said, "The Heavenly Sword sect originally had a half-saint guarding it, and then there was Ling Xiao. To be able to suppress the entire sect in one fell swoop. Only a true saint could accomplish this. When you entered and left the Heavenly Sword sect, it was impossible to hide from a true saint's eyes. If they didn't attack you, then they must be following behind you to lock onto my position. But since there hasn't been any movement even now, then it should be the latter possibility." Xian Ji's face paled. She subconsciously said, "What?" Chinyu said, "They lured me to the Heavenly Sword sect." He held his hands behind his back and paced back and forth several times, looking at the blooming peach blossoms above his head. "It seems that there is a trap there, and there is a high chance that it was set up to target me." Xian Ji's face paled even more. She gently bit her lips, unable to say a single word in her heart. She knew that if there wasn't an accident, then Chinyu's guess was likely correct. In other words, the Heavenly Sword sect was a trap. How could she persuade Chinyu to save Ling Xiao? And if he couldn't save Ling Xiao with the methods of a true saint, it was only a matter of time before they found out the truth. At that time, it would likely be their turn. Thinking of this, Xian Ji's entire body turned ice cold. Chinyu paced back and forth, his expression calm. It was impossible to see what he was thinking, but the truth was that at this time he felt as if he had worn out his iron shoes in fruitless searching only to find what he was looking for. Just as he was thinking about where he could find a true saint to kill, someone immediately came knocking on his door. If this person wasn't from the Western Desolation, then they were the remnants of that clan. Qin, you didn't feel any psychological burden killing them. The only thing he needed to worry about was that these people were clearly setting up a trap, so they must have some sort of assurance. The Western Desolation and that clan were extremely strong. Who knew if they had some sort of terrifying and mysterious method up their sleeves? Even if Qin Yu's current strength could be called at the peak of strength below the ruler realm, there was still a chance that he would encounter problems if he fell into their trap. Unless he could predict the degree of danger ahead of time or obtain a powerful safeguard, he wouldn't be able to escape even if there was a problem. There shouldn't be any problems using that sword. If he wanted to be a bit more safe, then it would be best if he could obtain that woman's promise. After all, with her cultivation, even if she just stretched out a finger, she could instantly reverse the situation. Thinking of this, Chinyu looked at the panic-stricken Xian Ji across from him. He could naturally guess what she was thinking. But right now, Chinyu couldn't give her a promise. He said in a low voice, "Wait here." As he spoke, he turned and entered the training room. After activating the spells, he personally sealed off the aura inside and outside. Then, Chinyu took a deep breath and began to try. Well, it shouldn't be a problem to try, right? After all, they could be considered acquaintances. Moreover, when she left, She didn't say that he couldn't summon her. As he comforted himself, Qin Yu lifted his hands. In the next moment, the phantoms of the sun and moon appeared above his head, their light fusing together. Normally, Qin Yu should have lifted his hand and slashed out with that swift and fierce sword. But right now, he was only looking for someone, so there shouldn't be a need to tear down his own residence. Several breaths of time later, as the sun and moon overlapped, the woman's impatient voice suddenly sounded out. "Boy, what do you want now?" Qin Yu was overjoyed. He hurriedly said, "Qin Yu greets your excellency, sovereign." Afraid that the other party would become impatient and cut off the connection, he hurriedly explained the situation. In the end, the Heavenly Sword Sect's mishap today was all because of me. Although I've already paid the reward, I still can't feel at ease if I ignore it, so humph! So you want to give yourself a guarantee that if you cause any trouble, I'll clean up your mess for you. Qin Yu's face stiffened. Although this was indeed the case, for better or worse, she was still a woman. Wasn't it a bit too rude to speak to a man like him like this? The sovereign clearly didn't have the time to care about Qin Yu's awkwardness. He coldly sneered several times and said, "I can promise you, but not everything in this world comes without a price. I will give you a mission soon, and you'd best complete it beautifully." There was clearly a second half to these words. It was likely that if he couldn't complete it, then he should just humph, but he was an adult, and there were some things that didn't need to be said too clearly. It was fine as long as he understood. Without giving Qin Yu a chance to refute or negotiate, the sun and moon phantoms extinguished with two popping sounds, as if two bubbles had been popped. It was clear that the Lord Ruler was expressing his dissatisfaction at being disturbed once again. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He felt that if he sold himself out, it wouldn't be easy for him to complete the mission in the future. But he had already agreed to it. Even if today's events didn't occur, there was no way for him to bargain. Whatever, he would worry about the future in the future. In the end, the sovereign wouldn't send him to his death. He cleaned up his expression. He turned and pushed open the door. When he returned to the rice paper, he had transformed back into the calm and dignified peach garden, Mr. Ninth. He lightly said, "Let's go. We're going to the Heavenly Sword Sect." Chapter 1434. Within Vastyang, there were many small worlds like islands in the sea, countless of them. In order to travel across the islands, one could only pass through the sea region that separated them. But besides a few small worlds that had fixed transmission channels built between them, most of the time one could only rely on their own strength to resist. This was certainly not an easy matter. This was because the sea region that separated the small worlds from each other was actually called the Void Beyond. That was a life-forbidden zone, but that didn't mean there were no dangers. On the contrary, even if all of the small worlds within Vastyang were added together, they would only take up less than 20% of the entire Vastyang world. The rest was nothing but nothingness, the pitch-black nothingness of the Void Beyond. Such a vast area bred and gave birth to terrifying life forms that swam through the dark nothingness. Cultivators that had the qualifications to come into contact with them and knew of their existence still called them realm void creatures. They were incredibly dangerous. But now, Qin Yu was holding on to Xianji. The two of them were hurtling through the Void Beyond at an astonishing speed. Without warning, the two of them came to a sudden stop. Although they couldn't see anything, with their formidable perception abilities as cultivators, Xianji knew that just now, an incomparably massive tentacle had swept past them by a hair's breadth. Although the two sides hadn't made contact, the aura that this tentacle emitted caused fear to rise in Xianji's heart. A long time ago, she had heard her honorable master mention that realm void creatures like to hunt down powerful cultivators. Thus, the more powerful an existence was, the more likely it was to arouse their interest. It seemed that swallowing the flesh and blood and souls of powerful cultivators was greatly beneficial to realm void creatures. When she was rushing to the peach garden, although she had encountered void creatures, They weren't as strong as the one she encountered today. Moreover, they didn't seem to be too interested in her. But today was different. Thinking of the rumors and the various horrors of void creatures, Xian Ji's eyes filled with fear. At this time, Qin Yu's calm voice echoed in her ears. "Wait here. Don't move." As he spoke, he let go and held away. Several breaths of time later, there was a wild explosion. Faint shockwaves swept out before everything calmed down. Qin Yu returned. He grabbed Xian Ji and continued on his way. So strong. Before this, she had heard that Mr. Ninth had relied on his own strength to suppress and kill Saint Zhou and Saint Lin. But today, she truly realized just how terrifying Qin Yu's strength was. Just now, that void creature had only used a single tentacle to sweep over and had already made her mind tremble. She felt as if she couldn't contend against it. However, even though he was so powerful, he was still easily defeated by Mr. Ninth. Could it be that his strength had already touched upon the level of a supreme ruler? Most likely not. Otherwise, there would have been some sort of strange phenomenon. After all, there was no way to conceal something like becoming a ruler. The entire boundless Yang world would have sensed it. However, even if she hadn't reached the level of a ruler, Mr. Ninth's cultivation realm was definitely at the pinnacle of a true saint. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she could look down on the entire world. With his help, he would definitely be able to save Ling Xiao and destroy the heavenly sword sect scheme. Thinking to this point, the rice paper's trembling heart suddenly calmed down, and a large portion of its uneasiness dissipated. On the grassland, palaces with red walls and black tiles stood layer upon layer, and they revealed a solemn and grand aura. Countless devout believers in thick felt knelt down with every step they took, praying for protection. A bald, red-robed monk with a pitch-black complexion held a prayer tube in his hands, a compassionate expression on his face. He looked down at the countless believers below him, constantly chanting. His whispers fused together, and there seemed to be a bit of spirituality to them. Suddenly, above the red palace, beneath the blue skies and white clouds, it was like a mirror had been heavily kicked and shattered. Qin Yu pulled the rice paper out. His eyes swept over the ground, but he didn't pause at all. He took another step and soared into the skies. Hurrying through the void, one had to constantly determine their direction in order to avoid any deviation. Otherwise, if they only focused on rushing forwards, it was likely they would discover that they had run into some unknown place. There had been many precedents of this in the past. This was only a very ordinary positioning movement during the journey. Through a lucky chance, it fell into the eyes of the people below. The monk outside the red palace paused for a moment, the prayer tube in his hands trembling. Then there was a bit of anger in his eyes. There was actually a cultivator from another side that had broken through to the holy palace. This was the greatest offense. But before they could respond, a peaceful voice sounded out in their ears. The monks revealed a look of understanding. They turned and bowed towards the red palace. Facing the confused and bewildered eyes of the believers, a monk stepped out. His warm and gentle voice spread through the air. Just now, my sex god was inspecting the heavens and was shocked. For all of you to be able to witness it, it is truly a great fortune. The believers immediately revealed fanatical expressions. They knelt even more devoutly, and their chanting became even louder. However, they did not see that in the palace they were kneeling in a brightly lit quiet room, there was an old man in a gold and red robe with a dignified and solemn expression. At this moment, he was raising his hand to wipe the fine beads of sweat that covered his forehead. He looked up, his wise and deep eyes staring at the place where that aura first appeared and then vanished again. He swept his eyes over the disciples below. That person just now is a true overlord of this world, a terrifying existence that can sweep away a part of the world. You absolutely cannot provoke him. Yes, teacher. The disciples respectfully bowed, their eyes filled with shock. In their eyes, their honorable master was already an immortal level character, but he actually felt such dread and awe. Just how powerful was that person just now? A world overlord. Could he be a legendary saint? Qin Yu borrowed the great furnace to condense his own great Tao. Of course, he had the qualifications to be called a saint. But thinking about it carefully, someone who walked the path of a true divinity was actually able to condense their great Tao and become a saint. This was truly a strange matter. Of course, he didn't know that as he passed by, he had frightened a rather fierce cultivator. To put it bluntly, with Qin Yu's current cultivation and boundary, anyone that wasn't a saint was no different from an ant in his eyes. Naturally, no one would constantly care about the feelings and performance of an ant beneath their feet. Moreover, there was another reason he didn't have time to think about it. He was about to arrive at the Heavenly Sword Sect. Knowing that this was a trap, he still stepped into it on his own initiative. This didn't feel good at all. The only comforting thing was that Qin Yu had obtained that woman's guarantee that if anything happened, she could help him clean up his mess. Hum. This woman's words were a bit unpleasant to hear. Thinking about it now, he still felt angry, but compared to safety, whether he was angry or not wasn't anything at all. So he endured it as long as he could. Xian Ji, who was filled with awe and worship deep in her heart, would never have imagined that the incomparably powerful Mr. Ninth, who was like a mountain that supported the heavens, would actually have such a depressing and spineless thought. Otherwise, her eyes would have widened and she would have found this hard to accept. A moment later, Qin Yu punched out and the dark void in front of him shattered. He pulled Xian Ji along and stepped forwards. Light sprinkled down. The blazing sun hung high in the sky. He narrowed his eyes and looked around, confirming that he hadn't gone the wrong way. He had arrived at the Heavenly Sword Sect. With a stir of his divine sense, he could sense this world. The sword intent that soared into the skies, although much thinner now, was still as dazzling as a lighthouse in the dark night. His eyes fell on Xianji. This woman was truly smart. She bowed and said, "Mr. Ninth, the Heavenly Sword Sect is over there." Qin Yu pulled her along. With just a few steps, he crossed the endless space and appeared above a great river. The river was surrounded by mountains. As he looked around, he soon locked onto a particularly steep and tall peak. He narrowed his eyes, thinking that he was right, ma'am? This aura, deep in Qin Yu's eyes, there was a flash of hesitation and surprise. But soon, it was covered up and everything returned to tranquility. Thinking for a moment, Qin Yu turned and said, "Don't go in, stay a bit further away. Before I appear, don't approach." Xianji knew that the disparity in their cultivations was too great and staying behind was useless. She respectfully said, "I ask Mr. Ninth to be careful." Qin Yu nodded. His figure flashed and he appeared on that tall and steep peak. A light seemed to flash in the depths of his pitch-black eyes. His lips curved up in a smile and he stepped in. As if he had rushed into water, faint ripples appeared in the air and he vanished from sight. Seeing this scene, Xianji's heart tightened. He quickly turned around and left, fleeing far away with a whoosh. When he was in the outside world, he could clearly see the layers of palaces and buildings atop the Heavenly Sword Sect's main peak. But after stepping inside, he discovered that this was only an illusion. It was pitch black inside, as if an eternal night had arrived, isolating and expelling all light. This situation was similar to when he passed through the void. But what was different was that in this darkness there was still a bit of light. Was he the one who lured him over? Qin Yu's thoughts raced. His figure shot straight towards the light. Since he had already entered the trap of his own initiative, there was no need to worry too much. And there was no need to search for the person who set this up. They would soon jump out on their own initiative and expose themselves in front of Qin Yu. A bit of light spread out from the hall. It wasn't bright, like a candle in a cold winter night. Qin Yu landed outside the hall. His feet were silent. He took several steps forwards and pushed open the door. In the place where the dim light was radiating was a chair, soaring cloud. His clothes were clean and tidy. He sat down on the chair. His face was pale. He watched as the door opened and Qin Yu walked in. His eyes were moved, followed by a bitter light. "Mr. Ninth, you shouldn't have come here." His voice was hoarse and weak, as if he had shouted just now. Qin Yu had a calm expression. "Whether I should or shouldn't, I have already come. So, there is no need to speak any more useless nonsense. It would be better to save some strength so that you don't suffer more." As he looked down, he could clearly see that just by barely saying a few words, Ling Zhao's clean robes had several bloody spots bursting out. It could be imagined that besides his face, it would be hard to find another part of his body that wasn't injured. To deal with a powerful cultivator, the methods he used wouldn't be as simple as flesh and blood torture. This was enough to draw a conclusion from Ling Zhao's current performance. For a half-saint cultivator to be unable to repair his mortal body's wounds, the degree of his weakness could be imagined. But even in this situation, Ling Zhao still didn't speak and didn't reveal Qin Yu's identity. Qin Yu shook his head. He didn't know whether he should praise Ling Zhao for being stubborn or for being inflexible. But in his heart, he couldn't help but appreciate Ling Zhao a little more. Ling Zhao bitterly smiled. It wasn't because of Qin Yu's sarcasm, but because he knew that Mr. Ninth's appearance here today had already indicated his stance. He was moved. "Mr. Ninth, be careful, they already have." With a stuffy cough, he was interrupted before he could finish. Rumble, rumble. The entire hall instantly disintegrated. An icy cold and terrifying aura drilled out from the darkness from all directions like chains, covering Qin Yu within. He looked up at the pitch-black sky that was revealed after the hall collapsed. His eyes flashed, and he lightly said, "Don't worry, it won't be a problem." The sound of footsteps rang out, accompanied by a cold and low laugh. "The Peach Gardens, 9th Qin Yu. I never thought that the one who came today would be you." Qin Yu turned his head. Beneath Ling Zhao's feet, in the light that hadn't yet been extinguished, he could faintly make out a figure. "Someone from the Western Desolation?" The person lightly said, "It seems that Mr. Ninth knows a great deal of secrets." Qin Yu said, "When I saw this darkness, I naturally guessed it. But I am curious as to why you have such great courage. You actually dare to appear in front of me by yourself." As the figure walked out from the darkness, his complexion changed and he instantly vanished. In the next moment, where he stood, the darkness fiercely twisted, as if a great maw had opened wide. One could hear sharp fangs grinding against each other, emitting shrill sounds. Shua, this person's figure appeared. As he thought about how he could instantly teleport in the darkness with the help of an external force, he feared he would have fallen into Qin Yu's trap. His complexion immediately paled. "Mr. Ninth's methods are excellent. No wonder you were able to rely on the strength of a single strike to forcefully kill 2 true saints." After a brief pause, his voice became increasingly gloomy. "But today, since the Western Desolation has set up a trap, they have naturally made thorough preparations. No matter who comes today, they will be consigned to eternal damnation, and Mr. Ninth is no exception." Pa, pa, the sound of footsteps rang out again. One by one, figures walked out from the darkness. In the blink of an eye, 5 true saints appeared. Their auras completely blended with the darkness, releasing an incomparably powerful pressure. "There's one thing that Mr. Ninth is wrong about. Since I know it is you, of course, I will not appear here alone." The conversation ended and the dim light under Ling Zhao's feet was finally extinguished. When everything returned to darkness, the 5 darkness true divines struck at the same time. At this moment, the surrounding darkness seemed to have come alive. A terrifying pressure came from all directions like a raging wave, wanting to crush Qin Yu into pieces. It was truly terrifying, not only because the attackers were 5 true saints of darkness, but also because the darkness today was extraordinary. Even the ruler of the vast sun world would not be able to escape unscathed after falling into this darkness. This was the reason why the Western Desolation dared to attack and set up this trap. No matter who it was, as long as they stepped into it, they would definitely die. This was indeed the truth. With the horror of the darkness today, anyone below the ruler level would die. Although Qin Yu was strong, he was not a ruler. There was still an obvious difference in strength between them. He indeed did not have the strength to resist. But coincidentally, Qin Yu also knew a little about darkness. Although he was not as proficient as the 5 true saints of darkness, it was not difficult for him to identify the source of the darkness. Thus, he had long discovered that the darkness today could be barely considered as one of them. As for why he used the word barely to describe it, it was because Qin Yu still did not understand why it was one of them. Chapter 1435. At the main hall of the main peak, the 5 darkness true saints stood around and felt the resistance from the darkness in front of them. Even though they were filled with killing intent, they still couldn't help but feel shocked and impressed. The 9 Qin Yu of the Peach Garden was actually so formidable. Even with the combined strength of the 5 of them and the Eye of Eternal Night helping them, they still weren't able to directly kill him. This was truly an unbelievable matter. But now it happened in front of them. Even though the 5 darkness true saints were impressed, they couldn't help but feel shocked. Qin Yu's strength was only a step away from the ruler realm. If they weren't careful enough, the trap that they had set up might have devoured them and buried them here. Luckily, such a sad and terrifying situation didn't happen, even though Qin Yu was stronger than they had imagined. Since he was already suppressed, it was only a matter of time before he was killed. Regarding this point, they had asked the Eye of Eternal Night and received a definite reply. But in reality, everything that they saw could be fake, not to mention the thick layer of darkness that they couldn't see clearly. Therefore, at this moment, the truth was different from what the 5 darkness true saints thought. For example, Qin Yu wasn't so strong that he was only a step away from the ruler realm, but his current state was much more relaxed than they had imagined. He didn't resist or struggle at all. That was because all the terrifying forces that came from all directions couldn't even touch him at all. They were all neutralized by the darkness in front of him. As expected, he was one of them. Qin Yu frowned and cupped his hands. Eye of Eternal Night, although you have helped me today, I still have to ask why. This isn't because I don't know what's good for me. It's something that needs to be clarified. In the thick darkness, a cold and calm voice sounded. You have the aura of my master. Honestly speaking, Qin Yu had guessed many possibilities. For example, he had extraordinary talent and luck, which was why he was favored by treasures and so on. But the truth proved that it was better not to daydream too much. It was useless and would only waste one's energy. No, from what the Eye of Eternal Night said, could it be that he was the reincarnated body of his master? After cultivating to this day, Qin Yu naturally knew that something like samsara really did exist. Unfortunately, the Eye of Eternal Night seemed to have sensed his thoughts at this moment and coldly pointed it out without hesitation. You are not my master. Qin Yu coughed, trying his best not to reveal an awkward expression. Then what did you say? Also, who is your master? My lord is naturally the most powerful existence in the world. He stands above all things. At this moment, there was a hint of fanaticism in his icy voice. The corners of Qin Yu's lips twitched. In truth, he had already guessed this before, but now he was able to confirm it. Given the Eye of Eternal Night's level and power, only an even more powerful existence could become its master. And Qin Yu just so happened to have such an existence standing behind him. The simple method of elimination was to confirm that the Eye of Eternal Night was referring to her. That woman's origin was indeed related to the Western wilderness. This would also explain why the Eye of Eternal Night, which had come aggressively at the Eastern Sea, had taken the initiative to retreat. From that moment on, it had already sensed the aura of that woman on Qin Yu's body. Do not be disrespectful to my lord. A cold shout rang out in the darkness, and a dense aura locked onto him. Qin Yu was secretly startled. Although he knew that the Eye of Eternal Night was incomparably powerful, only after personally sensing it did he realize that it might be even stronger than he had imagined. But on the surface, Qin Yu didn't reveal any fear. He lightly said, "I naturally respect His Excellency, ruler. There is no need for you to say anything more." Bastard! Just where did this master and servant pair get this ability from? They could actually sense the thoughts of others. This was truly a divine skill. All right, Qin Yu had to admit that he was a bit envious. If he could obtain this ability, he would be able to do anything he wanted. Humph! The Eye of Eternal Night coldly snorted, a hint of disdain in its eyes. Qin Yu's lips twitched. This fellow must have sensed something again. So I am being looked down upon. Damn, taking without asking is stealing. To actually steal my thoughts, this is too much. No, I also want to learn. I must learn. Qin Yu did his best to control his thoughts. He said, "Although the Eye of Eternal Night has expressed its goodwill many times, I must still verify this matter." There was a brief silence in the darkness. Then the voice sounded out once more. "You can summon masters, Will." The voice was excited, but there was also a bit of disbelief in it. There were very few of those emotions after that, but unfortunately they were caught by Qin Yu. His thoughts turned, and he immediately reacted. Forever. The Eye of Eternal Night was jealous. It was clear that although this fellow called His Excellency Ruler Master, it clearly didn't place much importance on the servant. It didn't even know how to contact her. Qin Yu's lips curved up. He finally felt that he had one around. He lightly coughed and said, "What else? Since you call yourself the ruler's subordinate, then I must ask His Excellency Ruler to verify your authenticity. Don't worry, this matter is very simple. I have already summoned him many times." "Humph, humph, you dare to shout at me? I will definitely let you experience what it means to show off." The Eye of Eternal Night stuffily coughed. It was clear that it had received the intense thought fluctuations that Qin Yu had deliberately sent out. Seeing it finally close its mouth, Qin Yu lifted his hands. With a thought, the phantoms of the sun and moon appeared, their light fusing together. At this time, Qin Yu's mind was completely focused on summoning His Excellency Ruler. He didn't notice that when the phantoms of the sun and moon appeared, the darkness around him began to shake, as if it had seen something extremely shocking. He had already bragged just now, so he could not respond. Otherwise, how could he have one around just now? He would be ridiculed twice as much. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. Just as Qin Yu was feeling apprehensive, an impatient voice sounded out, "You really are trash!" Qin Yu's lips twitched, but before he could speak, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him and fell to his knees. Little Black greets Master. What did it mean to choke with sobs and be on the verge of tears? Today, Qin Yu had experienced it for himself. This short sentence was enough to express his sorrow. At the same time, he let out a sigh of relief. Since the Eye of Eternal Night really was one of the lost subordinates of the ruler, then today's matters were much simpler. As he thought of those 5 dark true sages that were filled with killing intent and had an incomparably tyrannical aura, Qin Yu sighed inwardly and mourned for them for 3 seconds. With the help of this strongest traitor, killing them would be a very, very simple matter. The Saint Slaughter mission had ended, and he could even complete it more than expected. Hee. This was probably what they meant by plans not being able to keep up with changes. Little Black, why are you here? As the sun and moon intertwined, a phantom appeared. Qin Yu secretly wiped away a cold sweat for the Eye of Eternal Night. It was one of the dignified, supreme treasures of the dark world, and yet it had such a depressing name. If it was forgotten by others, that would truly be embarrassing. The Eye of Eternal Night was extremely excited, as if to be remembered was already a supreme honor. It respectfully said, "After the great changes of the past, Master disappeared and I fell into the hands of the Western wilderness. Because of my own abilities, I was exiled to the broken world of the southwestern wilderness. I thought that I would never see Master again in this life, but I never imagined that I would meet you again today. What callousness, what indifference! All of that had disappeared. All that was left was the excitement of finally seeing its master again. Master, please allow me to continue to follow by your side. I will swear on my spirituality that I will dedicate everything to you. Qin Yu felt a chill crawl down his spine. He thought that this fellow, the Eye of Eternal Night, was definitely a fanatic believer of that woman. As if sensing something, the figure formed by the Eye of Eternal Night fiercely turned its head and glared at Qin Yu. But soon, it seemed to think of something and its eyes stiffened. Master, he is. It's as you think. I'm old and my eyesight isn't too good, so I can only reluctantly make do. After a simple sentence, the ruler clearly didn't intend to explain any further. She lightly said, "Since you're here, I don't think I need to clean up after you." She yawned, as if she had been sleeping just now. She turned and was about to leave when she suddenly thought of something. After a period of time, Qin Yu will need to help me with something. You should have a way to smoothly send him into the desolate region, right? The Eye of Eternal Night's body trembled with excitement. It loudly said, "Master, rest assured that your will be realized." Very good. Then I'll be leaving. With that, she turned and walked away. Pooh, pooh. With two muffled sounds, the sun and moon phantoms were extinguished. Qin Yu's lips twitched. This ruler was really narrow-minded. Humph. Although you'd better maintain a certain level of respect towards Master. The Eye of Eternal Night frowned. Although its tone was still cold, there was a hint of caution in it. Qin Yu could confirm that this was indeed the case. He thought for a moment and suddenly said, "Eye of Eternal Night, in the future, without my permission, you are not to probe my thoughts." There was a moment of silence. Just as Qin Yu thought that his probing had failed and he was inevitably feeling a bit awkward, the Eye of Eternal Night stiffened and bowed. Yes, it was full of resentment and unwillingness, but it had actually succeeded. Qin Yu felt a trace of excitement in his heart, but also a bit of fear. Thinking back to the conversation between the Eye of Eternal Night and that woman, he was about to speak. Just now, he only had time to say 2 words before he was interrupted by the Eye of Eternal Night. "I won't explain anything that Master hasn't said." Qin Yu was stifled. He humphed coldly and said, "I said just now, without my permission, you are not to probe my thoughts." The Eye of Eternal Night paused. It stiffly said, starting from now. Qin Yu glanced at it. Although he hadn't obtained the information he wanted, being able to protect the safety of his thoughts was an unexpected harvest. Moreover, through this matter, Qin Yu could faintly grasp the correct position he had in his communication with the Eye of Eternal Night. "I have taken the initiative. I ask and you answer. It doesn't involve His Excellency, but this matter is related to the mission in the future. You had better not hold back." The Eye of Eternal Night said, "I will act according to the situation." Qin Yu ignored its weak resistance and raised a finger. First question. What is the relationship between the Dark World and Western Desolation? What is the background behind its establishment? The Eye of Eternal Night glanced at him and said lightly, "Western Desolation has never given up its ambition to occupy the Southwest Desolation. Moreover, the only passage to enter is in Western Desolation. Thus, this matter was tacitly approved by all parties. The passage to the broken world of the Southwest Desolation is not wide enough for true saints and above to pass through. The Dark World was established so that experts could descend at the last moment in case of emergencies." Qin Yu frowned. "That's it," the Eye of Eternal Night said. "The Dark World is the frontline fortress. Western Desolation has always been researching the possibility of strengthening the passage and allowing true saints and above to descend. However, this matter is very difficult, and there hasn't been much progress until now." Qin Yu was secretly shocked. Luckily, Western desolation didn't succeed. Otherwise, if a large number of true saints descended upon vast Sun City, they would be able to sweep away all the other forces. Not to mention, above true saints were the half-emperor realm and even stronger existences. Qin Yu's thoughts raced. Second question. What realm is the half-emperor realm? The Eye of Eternal Night frowned. Your mission involves the emperor realm? Qin Yu said, Answer my question. After a moment of silence, the Eye of Darkness said in a muffled voice, The emperor realm is the realm above true saints. It is the true peak of the desolation. If it involves this realm, after leaving this place, you better not ask too many questions. Otherwise, it is likely that you will be discovered. Hiss, there was actually such an amazing ability. He had to pay extra attention in the future. Qin Yu quickly raised a third finger. One last question. Oh, I'll keep it for now. If there is a need in the future, I will ask you again. Could there be such a thing? The Eye of Eternal Night's breathing became heavy. It gritted its teeth and said, Since there are no more questions, then let's discuss the matter of you entering the dark world. Qin Yu raised an eyebrow. Why do I have to enter the dark world? The Eye of Eternal Night said, As I said before, there is only one passage that connects the desolation region to this place. The other end is in the dark world. If you want to enter the desolation region and complete the Master's mission, you can only go through this passage. Qin Yu said, Don't tell me you don't know my relationship with the West Desolation? If I enter the desolation region from the West Desolation, I will probably die as soon as I arrive. The Eye of Eternal Night said indifferently, You can change your appearance and aura. Qin Yu glanced at the Eye of Eternal Night. This fellow seems to know a few things. It seems that it has been watching me for a long time. He rubbed his chin and sneered. I can deceive a true saint with my abilities, but it's hard to say what will happen if I go further. The West Desolation definitely has an Emperor Realm expert. Don't tell me that such an important passage isn't guarded by a super expert from the West Desolation. The Eye of Eternal Night said, There is indeed a half-emperor guarding it, but as long as you can obtain an item, it shouldn't be a problem for you to conceal yourself. Qin Yu's eyes lit up. What item? If he could conceal his true appearance and aura in front of an Emperor Realm expert, then it would be much safer and easier to complete missions in the future. After all, according to the woman, what he was going to do next would definitely be carried out in the desolation region. As expected, his premonition was accurate. Qin Yu didn't have much time left in the vast Yang world, the desolation region. According to his previous speculations, it would be an incomparably vast world with countless experts and endless opportunities. It was inevitable that Qin Yu would feel uneasy. He also felt a headache from the difficulty of the mission, but he also felt a bit of anticipation in his heart. In the vast Yang world, countless experts fought for the position of ruler. It was like a sea of red that couldn't be any redder. If he could jump out of it, perhaps he would enter a completely different world. What's more, that clan was also in the desolation region. Although Qin Yu hadn't revealed his strong desire to know his identity all these years, since he'd found a clue, he still had to investigate it thoroughly. Otherwise, it would be a bit too sad to live in this world without even knowing who one was or where one came from. Chapter 1436. Qin Yu took a deep breath and collected his thoughts. He looked up at the other side. There was no point in thinking about this right now. It was better to determine how he could smoothly sneak into the desolate region. The Eternal Night said indifferently, The crown of the darkness, ruler. He spoke calmly, his tone unruffled. Qin Yu couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, a mixture of surprise and anger in his eyes. You mean the legendary darkness ruler of the world of darkness? The Eternal Night nodded. That's right. His crown is a supreme treasure of darkness. If you take it and combine it with your own abilities, you can guarantee that not even an Emperor Realm cultivator will be able to see through you. Qin Yu rubbed his forehead, but he couldn't help but smile bitterly. For now, he would just pretend that the Eternal Night was right. The crown did have such an effect. But how was he going to take it? The Darkness Ruler. Just the name alone was enough to prove himself. Moreover, if the world of darkness didn't have the ability to protect itself, would the rulers of the vast Yang world allow it to exist until now? Needless to say, the rulers hadn't sensed the Western Desolation's actions or intentions. There had to be some sort of trade or compromise involved. But whether it was trade or compromise, both sides needed to be on the same level in order to have a chance of proceeding. Putting down his hand, Qin Yu took a deep breath. Let me ask you, what realm is the Darkness Ruler at? The Eternal Night said, Peak True Saint. Qin Yu frowned. Then let me put it another way. How strong can he be in the world of darkness? The Eternal Night paused, comparable to a ruler. So it was like this. Qin Yu glared at the Eternal Night. Could this bastard be trying to harm him out of jealousy? Comparable to a ruler. There was no need to say anything else. Trying to steal his crown was more like throwing away one's life. Qin Yu had an annoyed expression. He lowered his voice and roared, You think this will work? The Eternal Night said, Since I have brought it up, there is a chance of success. He glanced at Qin Yu. I'm not asking you to throw away your life. Bastard. Qin Yu felt like this guy was peeping again. He gritted his teeth and sneered. I'd like to hear the details. The Eye of Eternal Night said, Actually, it's very simple. When the ruler of darkness is in the world of darkness, his strength is indeed comparable to a ruler's. However, when he comes out, his strength is at most slightly stronger than a peak true sage. Qin Yu frowned. You have a way. The Eye of Eternal Night pointed at the thick, curtain-like darkness around them. Kill them. I'll make some arrangements that should be able to lure the ruler of darkness here. When that happens, you can make your move. Qin Yu had an incredulous expression. You want me to kill him? The Eye of Eternal Night said indifferently, There's an aura hidden in your body. It's very powerful. He was probably referring to the Sword of the Yi. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. He couldn't help but feel a bit annoyed in his heart. Why were these people able to sense this? Although it was good to scare people, if he revealed his trump card, he wouldn't have the chance to play dirty. A sword cry suddenly exploded in his mind. To put it simply, it probably meant that he was too weak and couldn't even conceal his aura, so how could he blame him? This was a sword that could not stand being wronged. Qin Yu's complexion became increasingly ugly. He couldn't continue living like this. Was he the master? Or was this sword the master? However, from the looks of it, he had to endure it for now. He could only slowly look for opportunities in the future. Suppressing his thoughts and calming himself down, Qin Yu started to think about the Eye of Eternal Night's suggestion. First of all, killing the 5 Darkness True Sages was also Qin Yu's request. Furthermore, from this angle, the two of them would be working together to lure and kill the Master of Darkness. This way, they wouldn't have to ask for help from the Eye of Eternal Night. Of course, this was just a small problem. The key was, what were the chances of winning against the Master of Darkness? If the Eye of Eternal Night was wrong or made a wrong judgment, and the Master of Darkness was lured here, not to mention killing others, he would probably have to hand over his head. Qin Yu said in a deep voice, This matter is very important. I have to confirm again. Eye of Eternal Night, are you sure about everything you said? Of course. Will you help me? As soon as he asked this question, he saw a strange expression on the Eye of Eternal Night's face. If I don't work together with you, will I be watching you die? He was being looked down upon again. This fellow was truly indignant in his heart. He had always been indignant. Qin, you couldn't be bothered to argue with him. He still needed him to help out later. It wouldn't be too late to teach him a lesson after this matter was over. Humph. Your master isn't magnanimous, but does that mean that I am? Sooner or later, I will let you know that trouble comes from a loose tongue. Sneering coldly, Chinyu said expressionlessly, "Then, let's discuss what we should do next." The Eye of Eternal Night nodded. The thick darkness was like a curtain that covered the sky, blocking all vision and senses. Even as a darkness true sage, he was unable to determine the situation inside. Although the matter of killing Chinyu today should be in the bag with His Excellency the Eye of Eternal Night's help, the progress is a little too slow. A long time had passed, but the resistance in the depths of the darkness was still there. The 5 darkness true sages couldn't help but frown. They thought that Chinyu was too resistant. Just as they were puzzled and were about to ask, the Eye of Eternal Night's thought rippled in their minds. Chinyu is about to die. 2 of you come and deal with him. As he spoke, the thick darkness in front of him surged and revealed a passage. It was finally over. The 5 darkness true sages were overjoyed. They looked at each other and chose 2 people. They bowed and flew into the darkness. From afar, a figure appeared in front of the 2 darkness true sages. It was Chinyu who was suppressed inside. At this moment, his face was pale, and he stood on the spot with his eyes closed. His aura had dissipated, and he looked like a pale corpse. At this moment, the 2 darkness rulers were enlightened. No wonder the progress was so slow. The Eye of Eternal Night wanted to ensure that his body was intact. That's right. With Chinyu's strength, he could bring his body back to the darkness world and refine it into a powerful darkness puppet. By doing so, he would be able to gain more satisfaction and recognition from the West Wilderness. As they thought about it, the 2 darkness true sages approached Chinyu quickly. However, at this moment, Chinyu suddenly opened his eyes. There was a hint of mockery in his cold eyes. Not good. The 2 darkness true sages were shocked. Their reactions were extremely fast, and a violent force burst out of their bodies. However, at this moment, their bodies stiffened and the darkness Tao in their bodies became sluggish. Although it only lasted for a moment, it was enough for Chinyu to take the lives of the 2 darkness true sages. Pooh, pooh! 2 muffled sounds could be heard, and a bloody hole appeared between their eyebrows. Red and white matter spurted out, and the light in their eyes quickly disappeared. Killing a sage was extremely complicated. However, if one were to say that it was simple, it was also an extremely simple matter. At the end of the day, it depended on one's own strength. It was extremely difficult for a weak person to kill a sage. However, if one was strong enough, one only needed an opportunity and 2 simple fingers. If one's body was strong enough, one only needed an opportunity and 2 simple fingers. Of course, it was all thanks to the cooperation of the Eye of Eternal Night. If not, Chinyu wouldn't have been able to do it so easily. The eyes of the 2 darkness true sages were filled with anger and fear. Obviously, they didn't expect that things would end up like this. One of the protectors of the darkness world, the powerful Eye of Eternal Night, would actually join hands with an outsider to plot against them. However, this was obviously the truth. After killing a true sage with each of his hands, Chinyu squinted his eyes and looked at their corpses. As expected, before the 2 corpses fell to the ground, their bodies suddenly became fainter. It was as if they were being wiped by a powerful eraser. Immediately after, there was another round of wiping. Then, the corpses of the 2 true sages disappeared completely as if they had never appeared. The corner of Chinyu's eyes twitched. Of course, he knew that this was a faraway place. The mysterious existence hidden in time and space had taken away his sacrificial offerings. This kind of method was really mysterious. He saw it with his own eyes, but he couldn't detect any abnormal fluctuations. However, very quickly, Chinyu frowned. He felt that something was wrong. Then he reacted and his face turned gloomy. He felt that he had been taken advantage of. They had agreed that he would only sacrifice 1 complete true sage. However, 2 of them had been taken away. If it was in the past, he would have just taken them away. There were only dead people around him, and they were of no use to Chinyu. However, it was different now. He had obtained the blood jade coffin and the ghost cultivation method from the Avicii sage. Rare items like the souls of true sages could greatly increase his own strength. Damn it! As expected, there was something else hidden in the contract. The stone tower actually couldn't see through it. It was really useless. Very quickly, Qin Yu's heart turned cold. He thought to himself, could there be something else in the contract? If he was schemed against again, it would be really troublesome. Stone tower, hurry up and come out. Master, don't worry. I guarantee that there are no other problems with the contract. The stone tower hurriedly spoke, as if it had guessed Qin Yu's thoughts. As for the true sage corpses that were taken away, I ask Master not to be angry. These mysterious existences that hide in space-time have always been fair and reasonable. Since we have taken your things, we will definitely pay you back in the future. Qin Yu's heart calmed down. Are you sure? The stone tower said in a low voice, I am sure. Fortunately, if that was the case, it wasn't unacceptable. Before Qin Yu could think further, the Eye of Eternal Night suddenly spoke. Mysterious existences that hide in space-time? Its voice was filled with dread. It was clear that it had a certain understanding of these existences. Qin Yu, I must remind you that it is best to stay far away from them. Although these existences are extremely powerful and have all sorts of inconceivable methods, most of them are crazy. If you come into contact with them too much, there will definitely be big problems. This should be a kind reminder. Qin Yu took a deep breath and waved his hand. Don't worry, I know what I am doing. There are still 3 outside. Continue. Seeing that he didn't respond, the Eye of Eternal Night furrowed its eyebrows but didn't say anything else. After all, it was the person chosen by its master. It was only natural that it would receive its master's protection. And compared to its master, these mysterious and powerful existences weren't anything at all. The 3rd ruler of darkness received an order from the Eye of Eternal Night. He was to enter the darkness and help the other 2 to deal with this. Just what was the problem? Didn't they say that Qin Yu was about to die? Could it be that the 2 rulers of darkness couldn't clean up the scene? As this person was thinking, his consciousness suddenly froze. In the next moment, he fell into eternal darkness. Chapter 1437. The curtain of darkness was a manifestation of the power of the Eye of Eternal Night. It was enough to hide the eyes of a sage. Thus, the 2 darkness true sages who were left outside were puzzled. At this moment, the curtain of darkness in front of them moved. The darkness true sage who had just entered walked out with a gloomy face. Seeing his expression, the expressions of the 2 darkness true sages changed. They hurried over. What happened? The darkness true sage smiled bitterly. Both of you, there is indeed a problem. That Qin Yu has another. As he spoke, he had already approached the 2 of them. At this moment, the 2 darkness true sages in front of them suddenly froze. The darkness true sage who walked out struck out with his hands like lightning. With a series of muffled sounds, a hole appeared between their eyebrows. In front of their eyes that were filled with disbelief and fear, Qin Yu's figure changed and revealed his true appearance. He watched as the 2 corpses quickly faded and disappeared. 5 darkness true sages, the pinnacle existences of the vast Yang world. Even though their positions were slightly shaken because of the arrival of the ruler, they were still absolute powerhouses, and they were all killed just like that. Even though these people died in his hands, Qin Yu couldn't help but have a strange thought. It turned out that killing a sage could really be so simple. However, this also proved the power of the Eye of Eternal Night. Such a powerful Eye of Eternal Night was only 2nd in the darkness world. One could imagine how terrifying the ruler of darkness was. It was definitely not an easy task to kill him. If he was not careful, he might lose his life. As Qin Yu's heart trembled, the cold voice of the Eye of Eternal Night sounded. Get ready. I am going to lure the ruler of darkness to descend. So straightforward. There's no need to think anymore. He felt that it was a little rash for the two of them to make a decision on such an important matter after a hasty discussion. However, it was obvious that the Eye of Eternal Night didn't think so. It only reminded Chinyu and had no intention of discussing. Rumble! The surrounding darkness suddenly surged violently like a tide. A ruthless and dense aura instantly shot up to the sky. At this moment, the illusion that covered the Heavenly Sword sect was as fragile as a mirror. It was easily smashed into pieces. Boundless darkness surged out from within like a broken dam. It swept out with a whistling sound and instantly covered a radius of a few hundred miles. The darkness was as thick and viscous as ink. At this moment, it roared and spun, releasing a terrifying aura that caused one's heart to palpitate. Xianji's eyes widened, and her pale face was filled with horror. Cold sweat instantly gushed out from her body, drenching her robe. It naturally didn't feel good when it stuck to her body, but at this time she was no longer in the mood to think about it. What a terrifying power of darkness! It was as though the eternal night was devouring everything in its path. It was fortunate that she was far away from it. Otherwise, if she were to be devoured by it, just the thought of it made her break out in cold sweat. Thinking about how Mr. Ninth was among them, even though he was certain that he possessed great strength, he still couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. However, this matter was obviously not something that she was qualified to intervene in. Xianji bit her lips, got up, and continued to retreat. And at the same time in the world where the Heavenly Sword sect was, almost all the powerful cultivators felt the terrifying aura coming from here. Raising their heads in shock, countless gazes gathered on them. However, none of them dared to come forward to take a look. Of course, just by sensing the fluctuations of this level of power from afar, one could not help but feel despair. Why should I go over there? Courting death. In the world of darkness, one couldn't even see their own fingers in front of them. This was an eternal melody. On the vast, silent, desolate plains, the great hall that had completely blended into the darkness stood there quietly. The mountains around it that were piled up with sand were like a giant shackle that sealed it here. Suddenly, this grand hall that had stood there for countless years began to gently tremble. Hum! Hum! A sound spread out in the darkness. A figure slowly appeared in the grand hall. He wore luxurious and loose robes that hid his entire body. He gave off an endlessly mysterious and powerful feeling. But at this time, if someone were to really look at him, they would only see an endless abyss. Because he was the incarnation of darkness in the world. Shua! Within the grand hall, a figure opened his eyes. His eyes were indifferent and calm, without the least bit of light surging within them. There wasn't the least bit of aura circulating within them. However, right at this moment, countless cracks suddenly appeared on the towering mountain that surrounded the hall, which was made up of sand that was blown over by the wind. There were so many of them that it was hard to calculate. They were like countless blades, or like arrows on a taut bowstring waiting to be released. All of their auras were locked onto the figure that appeared in the grand hall. His expression was calm, as if he didn't sense any of this at all, or as if he were already used to the scene. But thinking about it, the latter was more likely to be the case. He calmly waited. The cracks that appeared in the mountain range outside the grand hall seemed to sense something or obtain permission. Quietly, all the cracks vanished, as if that scene just now had been nothing but an illusion. The person in the grand hall certainly knew that this wasn't an illusion, but a method that the Western Desolate had laid down to imprison him. It had been many years since he had the chance to take a single step out, and he didn't know when he would be able to obtain true freedom. A fluctuation appeared in his eyes before immediately disappearing. The person in the grand hall took a step forwards. Then, like a phantom, he vanished from sight. Where the Heavenly Sword sect was, the endless darkness shook like a tide. As Chin-Yu calmly waited, time slowly passed. There was no movement. There was no movement. There was still no movement. Just as Qin Yu thought that the Eye of Eternal Night had boasted too much and that his plan to lure him had failed, it suddenly said, "He's here." There was no warning. These two simple words, but the meaning contained within them, left one's heart trembling. It indicated that today's situation had begun. Either Qin Yu could join forces with the Eye of Eternal Night and smoothly kill the Darkness Sovereign and take his crown, or they would be killed here. He hoped that the Eye of Eternal Night wasn't boasting, and he also hoped that the Sword of the Eastern Sea could help. Qin Yu suddenly discovered that his own strength didn't seem to have any decisive effect in this matter. This was a cold and ironic truth. Qin Yu bitterly smiled, but this thought only spun for a moment before it was suppressed in his heart. At this step, any extra thoughts were just a waste of energy. Bang! With a loud explosion, the skies above the heavenly sword sect suddenly shattered. At this moment, yin and yang seemed to reverse. Darkness swallowed everything. Even the great sun, hanging high above, disappeared without a trace. The Darkness Sovereign had arrived. At this moment, Qin Yu felt as if his 5 senses had been sealed off. Not only was everything pitch black in front of him, but his ears had fallen into absolute silence. It was like he had been exiled to a completely isolated space. Fortunately, this feeling only lasted for a moment. The Eye of Eternal Night's voice sounded out. "Since you know this is a trap, why did you jump in on your own initiative?" Just as the voice entered his ears, Qin Yu's heart shrank. A strong restlessness gushed out from the depths of his heart. His first thought was that he was done for. Since the other party knew everything, it was clear that he had lifted a stone to smash his own foot. Another voice sounded out. It was quiet and peaceful like a gentle night. It caused one's mind to relax and their eyelids to begin to struggle. Qin Yu fiercely bit the tip of his tongue, using the pain to struggle free. He hurriedly guarded his mind, but he was even more horrified. The Darkness Sovereign. This was the Darkness Sovereign. Just his voice alone possessed such terrifying might. "Because only now can I take the initiative to attack you. Today is a trap, but it is also the chance I have been waiting for." He paused for a moment and then chuckled. "If I swallow you, perhaps I will be able to break through the shackles placed on me by the Western Desolation." The Eye of Eternal Night's voice was faint. "You can give it a try." Bang! Wild fluctuations of strength instantly erupted. 2 terrifying strengths wildly collided. The place where Qin Yu was standing was clearly protected by the Eye of Eternal Night, so he wasn't affected. But even so, it was enough for him to clearly sense exactly how terrifying the 2 forces brazenly fighting outside were. Was this what the Eye of Darkness meant when it said it was stronger than a peak true saint? Bah! You bastard! Your words are far too unreliable. The 2 were not even on the same level. Okay. The only consolation was that the Eye of Eternal Night was far stronger than Qin Yu had imagined. It was actually able to face the tyrannical Darkness Sovereign head-on. Just as this thought appeared in Qin Yu's mind, his complexion suddenly changed. Because at this moment, the Eye of Eternal Night's voice sounded. "I was seriously injured and haven't fully recovered. At most, I can only hold on for a moment. Prepare to attack." Qin Yu thought of the Eye of Eternal Night being forcefully summoned in the world Zeroth. It was clearly referring to that time. Bastard! Since he knew that his injuries hadn't fully recovered, why did he have to force himself? Was it really so important to show his face in front of that woman? Whatever, if he couldn't deal with it, he would just summon that woman. With the power of the ruler, it shouldn't be difficult to suppress the Darkness Sovereign. "We can do this. There is no need to disturb Master." The Eye of Eternal Night's calm voice sounded. "I think you will agree with my point of view." Qin Yu's body stiffened. He felt a strong sense of malice. It was as if as long as he dared to shake his head, someone would immediately give up and give him another mark. At that time, he wouldn't even have the chance to summon the sun and moon phantoms and summon that woman. he would be directly targeted. Crazy, the Eye of Eternal Night was absolutely crazy. In order to obtain that woman's approval, it was actually willing to do such a brainless thing. But Qin Yu was sure that it really wanted to do so, and it could do it. Was he being controlled by a madman? Bastard, bastard. Qin Yu's complexion was ashen, but at this moment he could only grit his teeth and accept it. If he fought it out first, he might be able to successfully kill the Darkness Sovereign. If he really couldn't do it in the end, it wouldn't be too late to take the risk. He didn't believe that the Eye of Eternal Night would still stop him from asking for help when he was at the end of the line. Even if it was a madman, there should be a limit to how brainless it was. Otherwise, it would just fall out with him. You win. He gritted his teeth and roared. The feeling of working together that he had felt when he easily killed the 5 sages just now had completely disappeared. Eye of Eternal Night, you bastard, just you wait. Don't ever give me a chance. Otherwise, I will definitely let you know what regret feels like. Chapter 1438. Making up his mind was ultimately a depressing and powerless thing, because it was of no help to the current situation. He could only vent his emotions and place his hopes on the future. However, no one in this world knew what the future would be like. More importantly, Qin Yu wasn't sure if he had a future. He really wanted to curse out loud. However, Qin Yu was trying his best to resist the urge to curse out loud. What he should be thinking about right now was how to survive, because only by staying alive would he have a future. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed his emotions. The great Tao that he had condensed using the power of the furnace in his body was activated with a light hum. Back in the Zeroth world, Qin Yu had been forced to slash out with his sword. Its power was so great that even the ruler's will avatar that had fused with Yao Tao was sent flying. At that time, the great Tao in Qin Yu's body was only 5% complete, so it was far from being comparable to the complete great Tao today. Therefore, Qin Yu knew that the power of the next sword would be very strong, but he wasn't sure how strong it would be. After all, this should be the first time that the Sword of the East Sea had displayed its true power in this world. Hum! A subtle sword hum sounded in Qin Yu's mind. It was obscure and deep, but there was a hint of anticipation in it. Clearly, after being silent for countless years, the sword was tired of living like a pool of stagnant water. It hoped to stir up some water. Qin Yu had used the furnace to condense his great Tao, so he could barely control it. Therefore, not only was Qin Yu full of anticipation for this sword, but the Sword of the East Sea itself was also filled with excitement. I wonder if my sword gleam is still sharp after so many years of not fighting? The Eye of Eternal Night was really an honest person. It said that it couldn't hold on for too long, and it really couldn't. The surging darkness suddenly showed a trace of stiffness. Although it was just a flash, it was a fatal flaw for a powerful existence of this level. A light laugh sounded. It was the ruler of darkness who hadn't shown his face yet. His voice was filled with delight and anticipation, as if he could already see the Eye of Eternal Night being killed on the spot. Qin Yu's mind was tense, but his face was calm. He didn't reveal any panic. The reason was simple. He didn't believe that the Eye of Eternal Night, which had been so confident just a moment ago, would be destroyed so easily. Sure enough, the next moment, its voice sounded in his ear. Now, Qin Yu had already gathered his strength and was waiting. Now that he had nowhere to retreat to, he could only choose to believe in the judgment of the Eye of Eternal Night. With a growl, he stepped forward. The ground beneath his feet shook, and countless cracks spread out in all directions like a dense spider web. He raised his hand and grasped forward. A sword shadow suddenly appeared, and in just half a breath's time, it turned from illusory to solid. The edge of the sword trembled slightly, and a formless aura flowed out and entered the void, directly cutting it into pieces. At this moment, the great Tao within Qin Yu's body suddenly cried out. It was like it had been ruthlessly struck by a club, directly breaking his bones and spine. Kacha! Kacha! The sound of shattering metal entered Qin Yu's ears like billowing thunderclaps. It made his chest feel heavy and stifled, making it hard for him to breathe. He wished he could spit out a mouthful of blood. Qin Yu guessed that the collapse of the great Tao would cause damage to him, but the degree of the backlash was far stronger than he imagined. His field of vision darkened and his vision blurred. Luckily, Qin Yu didn't need to open his eyes to lock onto the aura of the ruler of darkness. The ruler of darkness was like an endless abyss that contained nearly all of the darkness in the world. Qin Yu's vision began to darken and his vision began to blur. Luckily, he didn't need to open his eyes to lock onto the aura of the darkness ruler. The other party was like an endless abyss that contained nearly all of the darkness in the world. But today, he was stronger than when he was in World Zero. Qin Yu bit down on his pitiful tongue and barely managed to keep his consciousness clear. It wasn't like before when he couldn't even see how his sword slashed out. But today, he was much stronger than when he was in World Zero. He bit down on the tip of his pitiful tongue and barely managed to maintain a clear mind. At least, he wouldn't be like before where he couldn't even clearly see how his sword slashed out. His great Tao had shattered, which meant that Peach Girl had lost the ability to continue living. He wondered if eldest senior apprentice brother had woken up. His great Tao had shattered, which meant that Peach Girl had lost the ability to prolong her life. Had eldest senior apprentice brother woken up? The letter he left behind would be discovered very soon. Eldest senior apprentice brother had woken up. Not too long after Qin Yu left, the Peach Garden's chief disciple finally managed to overcome the difficulty of breaking and establishing his great Tao. He had survived with great difficulty. The great Tao had collapsed and a true saint had perished. This was Vastiang's will. Although the existence of the Great Furnace had given eldest senior apprentice brother a chance to defy the heavens and change his fate, there were still countless dangers. Thus, the sleeping eldest senior apprentice brother's situation was far more serious than Qin Yu had described. It was only because of his trust in the Great Furnace and his trust in eldest senior apprentice brothers that he remained calm. In short, eldest senior apprentice brother had survived. The process of breaking and establishing his great Tao had thoroughly stabilized his cultivation. Like this, besides Qin Yu, an unspecialized saint, the Peach Garden now had another true saint guarding it. The Peach Garden fell into a period of celebration. As the news spread out, the crowds of people outside the Peach Garden multiplied by several times. The Peach Garden's Miss Ninth was able to kill Saint Zhou and Saint Lin with a single move. Her strength was tyrannical and could deter the 9 heavens and 10 earths. Moreover, the mysterious and unfathomable Peach Garden's chief disciple had broken through 2 realms and become a true saint. His strength had risen to another level. This was what it meant to have 2 true saints in one sect. This made the people of the world sigh with emotion. They thought that the destiny of the Peach Garden was truly unfathomable. They had thought that with the fall of the Garden Master, the Peach Garden would decline from its peak of prosperity. Then a great calamity descended upon the world, and it seemed that the Peach Garden would be destroyed. However, after a short period of time, not only had the Peach Garden not declined, but it had also taken advantage of the situation to advance further. Its power and status were even stronger than when the Garden Master had been alive. But while the people of the outside world were sighing with emotion, the Peach Garden had fallen into a panic without warning. The cause was that Peach Maiden had suddenly vomited blood. Her aura was rapidly dispersing, and it gave people a feeling that she was reaching the end of her life and would die at any moment. The maidservants serving her screamed in terror. They knew that if something happened to Peach Maiden, none of them would be able to escape. The first to learn of the news was Lei Xiaoyu. Her first reaction was to inform her eldest senior apprentice brother. The means of a true saint were naturally trustworthy. Then, she went straight to Qin Yu's courtyard. Big brother Qin was engaged to senior sister Peach Maiden, and everyone knew how much he cared about her. Now that something like this had happened, she had to inform him as soon as possible. Then she discovered that Chinyu, who had announced to the outside world that he was in closed-door cultivation, was no longer in the peach garden. He had disappeared once again. Luckily, there was a letter on the table, but it was written that only when eldest senior apprentice brother was present could they open it. Secretly rejoicing that she had already informed her eldest senior apprentice brother, Lei Xiaoyu picked up the letter and hurried to Peach Maiden's residence. By now, all the disciples of the peach garden who were not in closed-door cultivation had arrived. Bai Feng frowned and asked, "Where is little senior apprentice brother?" Lei Xiaoyu smiled bitterly. "Third senior apprentice brother, big brother Qin, has already left the peach garden. I don't know where he is now." At this moment, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She stared at Peach Maiden's courtyard, and an intense uneasiness surged in her heart. Finally, it turned into a single thought. Senior Sister Peach Maiden suddenly vomited blood and showed signs of life-threatening. Could this be related to Chinyu? As soon as she thought of this, her uneasiness deepened. Lei Xiaoyu suddenly thought of the letter in her hand and hurriedly said, "Where is eldest senior apprentice brother? Big brother Qin has a letter for him." "I'm here." A calm and gentle voice echoed out. The space in front of them twisted, and the eldest senior apprentice brother walked out. His expression was calm as before, not revealing much panic. At this time, this peach garden's chief disciple was displaying a sufficiently calm demeanor, but he had to use a void-shifting technique to cross just a few steps. This in itself was a clear indication of his true emotional state. Lei Xiaoyu hurriedly handed the letter to him. After the eldest senior apprentice brother opened it, his complexion changed for a moment before he composed himself. With a bit of strength in his fingers, the letter turned to dust. Then he swept his eyes over everyone. "I have an understanding of junior apprentice, Sister Peach Maiden's situation. You all go out and wait. There won't be any problems." Bai Feng relaxed. She cupped her hands together and said, "If so, then I'll have to trouble eldest senior apprentice brother." He turned to leave, but he discovered that Lei Xiaoyu was still standing where she was. Just as she was about to say something, he frowned, a look of surprise on his face. Lei Xiaoyu's face was full of worry, as if she knew something. She bit her lips and asked, "Eldest senior apprentice brother, is this related to big brother Qin?" The eldest senior apprentice brother knew that she had a close relationship with Chinyu, but in the current situation there was no time to explain. He gently said, "I will go and save her first. You all go out." Sometimes not answering was in fact an answer. Lei Xiaoyu paled. She bowed and walked out. Bai Feng was secretly startled. Junior apprentice, Sister Peach Maiden had an accident. So why was it related to youngest senior apprentice brother? But since the eldest senior apprentice brother didn't say anything, it wasn't good for him to ask. He chased after Lei Xiaoyu, wanting to find out more from her mouth. The gates to Peach Maiden's courtyard closed. Before Bai Feng could speak, Lei Xiaoyu bitterly smiled and shook her head. "Third senior apprentice brother, I only have a guess. I don't know the inside story, so let's wait for eldest senior apprentice brother to come out first." Peach Maiden finally regained her senses. The first thing she said was that something had happened to Chinyu. The eldest senior apprentice brother, who already knew the inside story, sighed inwardly. "Junior apprentice sister, there is no need to worry. My great Tao was also on the verge of collapse, but I was still saved by youngest senior apprentice brother. If it was him, there would naturally be no problem." Although he said this, deep in his heart, there was still a bit of restlessness. It had to be known that there was a great difference between the imminent collapse of the Great Tao and the complete collapse of the Great Tao. As for the collapse of the Great Tao and the death of saints, this was an ironclad law that had never changed since ancient times. As for what his youngest senior apprentice brother's situation was, he didn't have any assurance at all. Peach Maiden clearly realized this. A complex expression appeared on her face, but she immediately restrained herself and closed her eyes, no longer speaking. The eldest senior apprentice brother gently sighed. He wiped away the beads of sweat that had appeared on his pale face. He told his junior apprentice sister to rest well and then turned and left. He glanced at Bai Feng and then at Lei Xiaoyu. After a moment of silence, he said, "Something did indeed happen to youngest senior apprentice brother, but I believe he will definitely return safely." The first reason he made this judgment was because of the existence of the great furnace. There is actually such a divine object in this world that could reverse the collapse of the great Tao. Secondly, since Qin Yu had left a letter ahead of time, it could be seen that he had already expected this. With Qin Yu's methods and wisdom, if he had expected this, he would surely have made preparations. Perhaps all of this was within his considerations. Suppressing these thoughts, the eldest senior apprentice, brother, glanced back at Peach Maiden's courtyard. A complex look appeared in his eyes. He finally realized that there was actually such an inside story behind why his honorable master had perished. And in order to save Peach Maiden, his youngest senior apprentice brother was actually willing to do such a thing. The sincerity of his feelings was truly moving. Before today, even though Qin Yu had done so much for Peach Garden and even rescued it from the brink of destruction, the eldest senior apprentice brother could still feel that there had always been a trace of estrangement between him and Peach Garden. This left him feeling a bit restless. But now, this restlessness had completely vanished. His youngest senior apprentice brother could be trusted. He could only hope that he could return safely soon. Beside him, Bai Feng frowned. Although he didn't know the inside story, he could already guess that Peach Maiden was related to Qin Yu today. Beside him, Lei Xiaoyu subconsciously bit her lips, a dazed look in her eyes. It was unknown just what she was thinking. Like a bolt of thunder, it pierced through the layers of clouds, descending from the highest heavens and cutting into the endless dark abyss. There was a pained cough. It could be seen that even someone as strong as the Darkness Chief Sovereign would inevitably be injured in the face of this sword strike that came at the cost of shattering his own great Tao. But this also meant that the best result of killing the enemy with a single sword strike had already fallen through. And at the same time, the Eye of Eternal Night that had deliberately revealed a flaw to draw the Darkness Chief Sovereign into attacking and create a chance for Qin Yu to attack also seized this opportunity. Rumble, rumble. Where the heaven-span sword sect was located, all of the darkness rapidly gathered. It surged in from all directions and was cleanly swallowed up. And all of this happened in an instant. In the blink of an eye, night turned into day. The great sun above their heads seemed to be taking revenge. It released an even more dazzling light. It illuminated Qin Yu's half-kneeling figure and also illuminated his pale face that lacked the slightest hint of blood. The sword in his hand had long since vanished. A faint sword cry echoed in his ears, filled with anger and unwillingness. It was clear that he was dissatisfied with his first strike, just now. "I've almost been sucked dry by you, and yet you still think I'm trash." Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He gathered his thoughts and looked up. It had to be known that although he had already drawn out his sword and the Eye of Eternal Night had also taken advantage of this opportunity to attack, this seemingly short but actually terrifying battle had yet to truly come to an end. In other words, it was still unknown just who would be the final victor and who would be the one laughing in the end. The first thing that entered everyone's eyes was a person wearing voluminous robes. His entire body was covered up, and he gave off an unfathomable and mysterious feeling. But now his chest and abdomen had been brutally cut open. A long wound had been torn open, and his robes were hanging down, revealing a fierce and ferocious mouth. Blood recklessly gushed out, dyeing his body a deep scarlet. No matter how great of a master he was, he still appeared distressed and distressed. The only pity was that he couldn't see the true appearance of the Darkness Chief Sovereign. It was unknown just what sort of expression he would have after being struck by this sword.